Chapter 549. In the evening, Wang Lu received a letter in Gorgeous Town Inn. It was a letter from a seven-colored spirit bird whose wings were surrounded by spirit wind. Oh, what is this? Wang Lu curiously opened the letter while looking at the bird that was standing on the window lattice and constantly combing its feathers. The bird's posture was very arrogant, and it raised its head high, seemingly looking down on everyone. After opening the letter, Wang Lu found that the letter was actually sent by the host of the Temple of Heaven in Gorgeous Town. The letter was not long. The gist of it was that the arrival of the distinguished guests was not timely greeted, which was a lack of etiquette. In the evening, a banquet was set up in the Temple of Heaven to respectfully await your arrival. Of course, according to Wang Lu's understanding, the translation of this letter was, "Two outsiders, please report to me here." The Temple of Heaven was indeed worthy to be the hegemon of the heavenly earth. Although in theory it was only a religious organization that served the heaven, in fact, the tentacles of its power had already spread everywhere and were deeply rooted. Now, even the appearance of two strange cultivators in Gorgeous Town would attract its attention. Its scope of management was really broad. However, this was not surprising. During the day, Wang Lu and Lu Li ostentatiously ran to the Temple of Heaven to visit and even took back a few heaven news. During this period, they did not deliberately hide their tracks. And if the Temple of Heaven could not even find this kind of foreign cultivator who walked into its own house, it would not be qualified to dominate the heavenly earth. It was just that Wang Lu did not expect the other party to be so straightforward. In the evening, the invitation letter was delivered to his door. So, should he keep the appointment or not? When he was thinking about it, he saw that the seven-colored spirit bird was impatiently knocking on the window lattice with its claws, making a gurgling sound as if it was urging him. Wang Lu impatiently waved his hand. "I have received the letter, you can go now." The spirit bird suddenly widened its eyes and incredulously stared at Wang Lu, as if it was a young girl who had been molested by a perverted man. "Hey, what are you looking at me for? Do you want me to pay for the postage?" "Tiske, the dignified Temple of Heaven is too tasteless, sending a letter and paying for it." As Wang Lu spoke, he picked up a peanut from the plate on the table and threw it over. "Hey, eat it." The bird angrily flapped its wings and swept the peanuts aside. It then let out an excited cry that was crisp and pleasant to the ear. "Tisk, it's just a stupid bird, yet it's so particular." Wang Lu threw a spirit stone instead. The bird stuck its head out and caught it with its beak. Then it spread its wings and flew away. However, before it left, it flapped its wings and tail wildly, blowing a large amount of dust and fallen leaves into the room. After sending away the proud messenger bird, Wang Lu turned his head and saw Lu Li curiously watching the departing back of the bird, seemingly reluctant to part. He couldn't help but laugh. "Ha ha, I forgot to ask you if you like to eat roasted bird." Lu Li was slightly resentful. "Senior brother, what do you think I am?" Then he carefully swallowed. That night, Wang Lu and Lu Li appeared on time in front of the Temple of Heaven. After thinking about it, Wang Lu felt that it was more interesting to keep the appointment. First, the wording of the other party's letter was respectful and polite, and it seemed that there was no evil intention. If he rudely refused, it would appear that he had a guilty conscience. Second, an opportunity to talk directly with the middle-level personnel of the Temple of Heaven was very necessary at this stage. After all, most of the information obtained through reading the Heaven News was speculation, and many specific matters could not even be guessed. However, if he could talk directly with the monks of the Temple of Heaven, he had the opportunity to get more information. At night, the Temple of Heaven was no longer open to the public, and the door was closed. When Wang Lu arrived at the entrance of the Temple of Heaven, a plain-dressed girl quietly opened the door, welcomed the two of them in, and led them all the way to the inner hall of the Temple of Heaven. The banquet in the inner hall had been prepared. There was only one person at the banquet, a beautiful woman who looked to be in her 30s. From the characteristics of her dress, it could be seen that she was Li Yan, the person in charge of the Temple of Heaven in Gorgeous Town. The woman was dressed in a gorgeous and beautiful dress, which meant that she was ranked 5th among the 9 layers of heaven in the Temple of Heaven, and belonged to the backbone of the Temple of Heaven system. The phoenix hairpin on her head was inlaid with a blue stone, which symbolized the status of the leader. After a simple greeting, Wang Lu and Lu Li took their respective seats. Then Wang Lu and Li Yan each put on a polite mask and chatted for a while, and then the tone of the banquet was set. Sure enough, as expected, this was a simple and ordinary meal to deepen each other's feelings. After all, no matter how overbearing the Temple of Heaven was, it would not go so far as to arrogantly offend all the cultivators in the world for no reason. Li Yan invited the two of them to come, but it was more for friendly exchange and to sit down and discuss. Since the tone of the banquet was set for friendly exchange, after a round of toasting, the topic quickly warmed up. Li Yan inadvertently asked about the origin of the two, and Wang Lu said that it was a hermit cultivator inheritance in the mountain. In any case, with how big the heavenly earth was, even the Temple of Heaven could not control the overall situation. At least, it was recorded in the heavenly news that when the lower realm invaded, many hermit cultivators in the heavenly earth generously came out to help. And Li Yan also did not delve into the hermit cultivator's origin. After skipping over the identity issue, the three of them began to discuss the issue of immortal cultivation. Wang Lu and Lu Li came from famous sects, while Li Yan was backed by the Temple of Heaven. Both of them were knowledgeable and had a deep foundation. The two sides' immortal cultivation systems were very different, but there was no lack of commonalities. For a time, the discussion was very heated, and both sides felt that they had benefited a lot. Taking advantage of the heated topic, Wang Lu simply extended the topic and raised a question that he was very concerned about. Fellow Taoist Li Yan, I have observed the operation of all things in this world, and all of them contain the supreme path, but there is one thing that I can't understand. Fellow Taoist, please go ahead. I see that all the creatures in this world are divided into male and female, yin and yang are in harmony to reproduce and live. For example, the animals, insects, and fish on our dinner plate are like this. But why are we human beings different? Has fellow Taoist ever thought that perhaps we human beings should also be like other creatures? Li Yan took a sip of tea, revealed a smile of understanding and said, Fellow Taoist's question seems ordinary, but it actually hits the nail on the head. Why are we human beings different? I believe more than one person has been curious about this question, and the answer is actually very simple. Because when the heaven created us, it made us the spirit of all things, the leader of all things. Therefore, we have a unique advantage that other creatures do not have. Ordinary creatures need to be divided into yin and yang, each having half to live and multiply endlessly, but we human beings can monopolize both sides of yin and yang. I think this is also one of the manifestations of human beings being superior to other creatures. As for what fellow Taoist said about being yin and yang, I believe it is just an illusion during cultivation. You see, the yin and yang in my body are in harmony, there is no imbalance. Of course, if we talk about the root attribute, I am indeed yin, but this is because we are only the descendants of human immortals, not immortals in the real sense, so there is still a little deficiency. When our cultivation realm is high enough, this deficiency will also disappear, and by then, we will become truly perfect creatures. Wang Lu almost knelt down. Li Yan was indeed worthy to be the backbone of the 9 layers of heaven of the Temple of Heaven. The face of this professional swindler was really amazing. A ridiculous theory could actually be said by her in such a convincing manner. Then has fellow Taoist ever considered that some organs in our body look very suspicious? Li Yan blinked her eyes and said, Suspicious organs? Fellow Taoist is referring to. Wang Lu very simply and clearly pointed between her legs. Li Yan was somewhat confused and also somewhat amused. This is the source of our happiness. Hey, is the joy of the Temple of Heaven actually this vulgar? Wang Lu had to patiently explain further, I mean a little deeper inside, the internal organs. Li Yan suddenly understood, you mean there. Indeed, I don't know what its use is. Apart from making those ordinary people who have never cultivated and can't control their qi and blood every month, it is meaningless. Wang Lu then asked, if our current state is already close to perfection, then don't you think it is unnecessary for that thing to exist? Creatures similar to human beings give birth to the next generation through there, but we don't need to do so. Instead, we are bestowed by the heaven to the next generation, then. Li Yan smiled and said, like I said, we human immortals are not real immortals, so it is excusable to leave some traces of imperfection on our body. In fact, in addition to the place you pointed out, there are still many useless things on our body such as the cecum, isn't it? I think fellow Taoist is probably too obsessed with the so-called perfection. Speaking to this point, perhaps because she was already drunk, Li Yan simply said a few more words. Actually, I am very clear about what fellow Taoist wants to say. Over the years, there have been many people who have raised similar questions to you, including me. I have also thought that there should be a kind of human being in this world, similar to us but different, born masculine, but when I carefully read the ancient books of the Temple of Heaven, I gradually realized how stupid my question was. Perhaps in the chaotic era we human beings were indeed divided into 2 kinds, yin and yang, but later the heavens sublimated the earth to become the heavenly earth, and our ancestors also stood out from ordinary human beings. Presumably, from that time on we gradually changed. Wang Lu had nothing to say. For a swindler who attributed all problems to the heaven, it was a waste of time to say more. At this time, Li Yan also finished talking and began to get up to see the guest off. It was just before they parted, Li Yan sent Wang Lu a letter. Fellow Taoist is very knowledgeable, and many of your ideas are deeply inspiring. You have also answered a lot of problems that have troubled me for a long time. Unfortunately, I can't answer all your questions. But the Temple of Heaven is full of talented people. Above me there are still open heaven, harmonious heaven, and so on. Presumably they can answer your questions. However, fellow Taoist is not a member of the Temple of Heaven, so take this letter. With it, you can go to the Palace of Heaven to pay a visit to Lady Moonless Harmonious Heaven, and let her answer your questions. Wang Lu put away the letter of recommendation, earnestly thanked her, and then was sent all the way to the door by Li Yan. Actually, you don't have to thank me. Today my harvest is bigger than yours. Your understanding of immortal cultivation is an eye-opener. Come to think of it, I just received a few cultivators a few days ago. Many of their viewpoints are similar to yours. If you have the opportunity to meet them, perhaps you'll be able to get along well with them. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu was surprised. Many of their views are similar to mine? At the banquet just now, some of the statements that Wang Lu said that really inspired Li Yan were basically the differences between the cultivation system of 9 regions and the cultivation system of this immortal dream. And if those people's views were similar to Wang Lu's, it was likely that in this immortal dreamland, in addition to Wang Lu and Lu Li, there were other people. Moreover, they had already visited Li Yan first. The question was, who could it be? Chapter 550. According to Li Yan, the several cultivators who visited the Temple of Heaven a few days ago had received several tasks from her. The Temple of Heaven often issued various reward tasks to the loose cultivators. At this time, they should be in Gorgeous Town. Wang Lu was very curious about what kind of sacred being would come before him. Before this, he had always thought that this immortal dream was closed, which meant that once a group of people entered, it would be closed to the outside world. Unexpectedly, it was actually open, similar to the 5 Blood Spirit Crown competition. Wang Lu was not worried about a simple dungeon raid. His many years of martial arts achievements were enough to rely on. However, once there were outsiders involved, the problem would often become complicated. Wang Lu was not worried that he would be hindered by others. The problem was that when he raided the dungeon, although he often took an unconventional path, once he unsheathed his sword, it would be a straightforward crushing situation. Those who rashly stood in front of him were likely to be directly crushed. Wang Lu didn't want to inexplicably increase the sin of killing, so he wanted to make contact with those people before he made his move, so that they could have a tacit understanding with each other. In theory, it should not be difficult to reach a tacit understanding. Li Yan said that their cultivation base was not high, and they even took over the task of doing odd jobs. Presumably in this dungeon raid, their goal was limited, which was different from his own. Thus, they should be able to live in harmony. According to some clues provided by Li Yan, Wang Lu soon found these several cultivators in a house in Gorgeous Town. However, when he and Lu Li landed in the courtyard with his flying sword and met those people face to face, he felt a deep sense of regret. Damn it, I was careless. I should have found out that these people's magical power fluctuations are somewhat familiar. Recently, I'm getting older and forgetful. And just as Wang Lu's expression began to distort, the several girls in the courtyard also saw him. The next moment, an astonishing scream resounded through the sky. Sister Wu. Ah, that's right, I am now blessed with an illusion technique wearing the appearance of my master. And this familiar voice, this amazing enthusiasm. Wang Lu's thoughts instantly returned to the past, which made his reaction slightly slow for a moment. However, Wang Lu only hesitated for a moment before 4 fragrant winds whistled toward him. In the blink of an eye, he was surrounded by the 4 girls. Even Lu Li, who was previously holding his hand, was pushed to the side. There was a constant chatter in his ears, and every sound brought back memories of the past. Sister Wu, we've missed you so much. Lin Wan was the most enthusiastic of them all. Yes, we haven't seen each other for a long time. This was the eldest sister Tian Daolan. You haven't contacted us for so long. You're heartless. Cherry said. Sob, we were abandoned by Big Sister Wu. From now on we're 4 pairs of used shoes, sob. Yingtao had become bad after not seeing him for a while. Previously, Wang Lu had a chance encounter with the 4 sisters in the immortal dreamland of the group of immortal tombs. He took the 4 of them to pass through the instance and for the first time came into contact with the secret of time travel in the group of immortal tombs. After their separation, the 2 sides only occasionally exchanged letters. They thought that with the vastness of 9 regions, it would be very difficult for them to meet again. Unexpectedly they met again here. While thinking about it, Wang Lu felt the four warm bodies very intimately sticking to him. The soft touch spread all over his body, and what was even more intense was the fiery enthusiasm from those four bodies. No, it was not just fiery, it was simply explosive. In order to compensate us, Sister Wu, let's do double cultivation now. We've just made the bed, a luxurious 5-spirit crystal stone bed that can accommodate up to 10 people. Yes, let's do double cultivation now. We really miss Sister Wu's telepathic finger. Come on, this time we will definitely not faint so quickly. Rest assured, Sister Wu. At the same time, with such explosive speech, the four yin and yang schoolgirls moved very quickly. Tiandao Lan waved her hand to spread out a perception concealment spell that covered the courtyard. At the same time, together with the other three, they began to take off their clothes. The yin and yang school's uniform was carefully designed, and it was also famous in the entire 9 regions Wanxian League. In addition to the most basic function of body protection, stabilizing flow, and other effects, the biggest feature was, no matter how gorgeous and exquisite it looked, when taking it off, it could be easily taken off as long as it was gently pulled by the mechanism. Therefore, in an instant, Wang Lu felt that the touch on his body was a bit different. At the same time, those 4 pairs of claws boldly reached out to him. Sister Wu, the last time we were together, you teased us, but this time we want to take our revenge. That's right. You even told us that you have a little fresh meat disciple that we can manipulate, but he seems to be easy to talk to, and he's very strict in guarding his chastity. There's no flaw at all. Your compensation doesn't work at all. Yes, this time we must take our revenge. This time we also practiced the telepathic finger. Sister Wu, you can enjoy it with ease. Seeing that the situation was about to enter an irreversible situation, Wang Lu roared, wait for me. At the same time, his non-phase sword chi propped up a layer of protection, pushing the 4 people away, barely maintaining the line of defense. Sister Wu, you're being shameless again. How could you use your non-phase sword defense at this time? Yes. Didn't we agree that we're only allowed to use dual cultivation to decide the outcome? If you want to protect yourself, you have to beat the opponent 1 step ahead. If you can make the 4 of us unconscious like last time, we'll be completely convinced. But this time it's not that easy. We haven't seen each other for a few years and we've been cultivating hard. So, come on, Sister Wu, let's decide the outcome again. Wang Lu felt that cold sweat was about to flow out. Decide the outcome, your ass. Although he had never been afraid of any challenge since his debut in this fight, he really had no choice but to be afraid. Especially when he saw the 4 girls had already stretched out their dexterous and slender fingers, Wang Lu felt a burst of pain in his balls. Is this the telepathic finger? Honorable Master, how much sin have you committed in those days? Wait a minute, I want to say, you've got the wrong person. Wang Lu said. Seeing that Tiandao Lan's concealing technique was not bad, he simply lifted his illusion. Look, it's me. Tiandao Lan and the other 3 girls were dumbfounded. It's you? Seeing that the 4 of them had stopped, Wang Lu was slightly relieved, nodded with a smile and said, because of some special reasons I'm wearing my master's face. But I'm the real Wang Lu, not your Sister Wu with telepathic finger. Just now, you also felt my non-phase sword defense, which is very different from my master's. In order to avoid being regarded as Wang Wu's fake excuse, Wang Lu also added a few words of explanation. However, Tiandao Lan and the others simply didn't pay attention to it. It's Wang Lu. We missed you so much. I haven't seen you for a long time, but you're still as handsome. No, I can't help but want to dual cultivate with you. Wang Lu was inexplicably surprised. Hey, can you guys figure out who you are? I'm a serious person, I don't have any telepathic finger to serve you. Tiandao Lan said with a charming smile, you don't have it, but we do. Lin Wan was eager to give it a try. Moreover, who said you don't have it? Aren't you men born with telepathic finger? Hey, I'm not happy to be called a finger by you. And just at this time, suddenly, the youngest Li Qingxi asked in surprise, men? Aren't women the only ones who can come in here? Tiandao Lan and the others were also stunned. Yes, this is a women's immortal dream. Wang Lu, how did you come in? Ying Tao suddenly had an idea. Turns out Wang Lu, you're also a woman. Is your sister? Aha, that's even better. Since we're all women, let's be honest with each other. Aren't the trigger conditions for you to be honest with each other too broad? Is the only function of your exquisite dress to be taken off? If they have wisdom, they would definitely cry, right? We will carefully teach you telepathic finger. Damn it, it's just a mere telepathic finger, yet you still want to talk about it endlessly? Believe it or not, I'll use my big excavator to dig you until you cry for your parents. However, seeing that the several people of Yin and Yang school have entered a fanatical state, perhaps common sense wouldn't work. Thus, Wang Lu had to resort to his killer move. Lu Li, come here. Lu Li, who has been foolishly watching the show from the side, came closer. However, just as she arrived at Wang Lu's side, she was hugged by Wang Lu. I'm sorry, I have a girlfriend now. What? The four women exclaimed in unison, and then incredulously looked at the equally surprised Lu Li. As she's your girlfriend? No, you actually have a girlfriend? Wang Lu was immediately unhappy. Don't tell me I have a boyfriend? As soon as his voice fell, he saw Ying Tao slightly tilted her head and said, I heard that you and Hai Yun fan of 10,000 Arts sect. What the hell, where did this gossip come from? It's Sister Wu who told us. She also said that she earned a lot of money by writing doujinshi about the two of you. Your uncle's Wang Wu? In short. Wang Lu took a deep breath and suppressed his anger. I'm a normal and loyal man, I won't do anything that would let down my girlfriend. Lin Wan pursed her lips and somewhat discontentedly said, What's so good about her? Although her talent and cultivation base are indeed higher than us, and her face is also beautiful, she doesn't seem to understand the matters between men and women, so it's impossible for her to serve you well. Tian Daolan also said, Yes, the most important thing for a woman is her inner charm. Oh no, it's her inner charm. Lu Li curiously asked, Senior brother, what is inner charm? Wang Lu patted her head. Don't think too much, it's not something that your IQ should consider. Oh. Then Wang Lu sighed and explained to Tian Daolan and the others, Yes, with her temperament even in 100 years, it's impossible for her skill to be on par with you, but, with that, he stretched out his finger and untied a button on Lu Li's chest. She has breasts. Chapter 551. When Lu Li's flawless deep ravine appeared in front of them, the girls of Yin and Yang school knew that they were defeated. In terms of size alone, Lu Li's chest didn't seem particularly exaggerated. In 9 regions, the value of D cup couldn't even be counted as 1 in 1,000, and it was even worse than those demons. However, as the saying goes, the amateurs watch the excitement, while the experts see the artistry. For the professionals of Yin and Yang school, the extraordinariness of Lu Li was clear at a glance. The aesthetic ability of cultivators was on a completely different level from that of ordinary people. Because most of the cultivators of foundation establishment stage could begin to transform their body. Even a 5-inch nail could transform into a 9 feet tall man, let alone a mere cosmetic breast augmentation. However, because the technology of transformation had become stronger, the corresponding aesthetic standard would also become harsher. In addition to paying more attention to details, in Shudan stage and King Pill stage and above, the beauty or ugliness of a cultivator was also measured by the degree of internal and external harmony. If there was no internal support, the simple transformation of the body was just an empty shell. And in this respect, Lu Li, who cultivated the brilliant sword heart, was almost unparalleled. Tian Daolan asked herself, even those senior sisters who specialized in beauty in Yin and Yang school had to at least reach Yuanying stage before they could reach Lu Li's current level. What Wang Lu used to show off was really an unparalleled weapon. Perhaps Lu Li's skill was as pure as a white paper, but her heart condition was too good. This was like, the most expensive fish-flavored shredded pork cooked by a famous chef could be sold for less than 100 taels of silver. However, a bear paw that had just been hunted from the deep mountain, even if it was raw, would be worth more than 100 taels of silver. The quality of Tian Daolan and the others was quite good. Unfortunately, they met Lu Li. Alas, I admit defeat. Tian Daolan put on her clothes with flagging interest. The other several girls also reluctantly lowered their heads. After the scene was subdued by Lu Li's big weapon, the several of them returned to the room and could finally have a normal conversation. After a brief greeting, the several of them got to the point. Senior brother Wang Lu, how did you come in? Lin Wan impatiently asked, isn't this group of immortal dreams limited to women? Is it because you have some special authority? Wang Lu sighed. I also want to know why. I myself am completely baffled. Then he simply explained what had happened at the entrance, but after Tian Daolan and the others heard it, they just frowned, unable to figure out what had happened. After a while, Tian Daolan suddenly remembered something. By the way, do you remember that Chang Di? She can be considered to have entered this group of immortal dreams as a non-woman. Cherry and the others were enlightened. That's right, Chang Di too. Wang Lu was curious. Chang Di? Tian Daolan explained, and she is also a disciple of my Yin and Yang school, just that she comes from a branch family. Although her heart is a woman, her body is that of a man. Didn't they say that a man with a woman's heart doesn't count? But Chang Di used to be a genuine woman. It was just that when she was cultivating yin-yang reversal, she accidentally went berserk, so she turned into a man's body. In the end, the group of immortal dreams still recognized her as a woman. Later, the elders analyzed that perhaps as long as you were once a woman, a 100% natural woman, even if you are no longer one, it can still count. So, senior brother Wang Lu, could it be that you are in a similar situation but you don't remember it? Absolutely not. Wang Lu was resolute. What a joke, from the time he was born until now, he could remember everything, and it definitely didn't include the memory of his gender being reversed. From the time he was born, he was a genuine man, there was no mistake. From the time I was born? That's strange. Just when should I start counting my life? Theoretically, Ouyang Shang's time should also be a part of my life, right? Including the time when my soul drifted to the 3,000 worlds, it should also be counted as a part of my life. Could it be that there was something wrong with it? But Ouyang Shang was a genuine man, there was no mistake about this. Could it be that during the time when my soul crossed over? Speaking of which, this was indeed an unsolved case because Wang Lu didn't completely grasp his past memories. Regarding the time when he drifted through the 3,000 worlds, he only retained a lot of fragments, but it didn't include the part where he knew himself. In other words, Wang Lu couldn't judge what kind of person he existed as during that period of time. Therefore, the possibility that he was once a woman couldn't be ruled out. And when he thought of the time when he crossed over and became a woman, Wang Lu felt that there was nothing more ket up than this in the world. No, there's definitely something wrong with this deduction. There must be some other reason why I could enter this group of immortal dreams. Let's change the topic. Wang Lu let out a long sigh and then casually asked, is there any appraisal result on the heavenly silk headscarf? A few years ago, when he experienced the time travel scene in the immortal dreamland for the first time, that heavenly silk headscarf became the key evidence to prove whether time travel really existed. Unfortunately, after a few years, Yin and Yang school still couldn't come up with a reliable answer. Even today, whether time travel existed or not was still an unsolved mystery of the group of immortal tombs. However, many people had already forgotten about that heavenly silk headscarf. When it came to the heavenly silk headscarf, Tiandao Lan looked embarrassed. In recent years there have been some results from the divination, but there are many contradictions between them. The elders have spent a lot of effort to deal with them, but the result is still very vague. Wang Lu said, what if we exclude all the artificial subjective assumptions and only look at the result of the divination? Tiandao Lan said, that heavenly silk headscarf is indeed one of the parts of the set of feather clothes. Wang Lu nodded his head. Go on. However, it doesn't seem to be the part that we lost because the karma related to Yin and Yang school on this headscarf is too thin. It's like it has just been made and hasn't been used yet. But in theory, it should have been used for a long time before it was lost. Do you have any clear evidence to prove this? That heavenly silk headscarf was indeed used by Yin and Yang school before it was lost? This is very difficult. That part of history happened a long time ago, so the written records are already very vague. But it should have been used. It's hard to make a set of magical equipment, but it didn't use it, it doesn't make sense. Wang Lu closed his eyes and thought for a while, and then opened them and said, do you think it's possible that when your feather clothes were just made, one of them had already been lost? It's just that, at that time, your ancestors made a counterfeit or similar method to cover it up. At the same time, the original one was received into the group of immortal tombs and then distributed to the later generations of Yin and Yang school in the form of a prize. Upon hearing this, Tiandao Lan was startled. This, if we don't consider so many of your assumptions, it seems to make sense. After all, the historical records before the Age of Chaos are too vague so you can say whatever you want. But the question is, why did our sect's most valuable treasure fall into the group of immortal tombs? Yes, why? Wang Lu asked with a smile. In his heart he already had a vague guess but he no longer said it. How's your progress in this pass? Tiandao Lan immediately complained, how could there be any progress? Aren't we just doing odd jobs for other people? It's just some trivial tasks. The reward is not much but the effort spent is actually not little. Wang Lu asked, then why did you guys buy a house here? Do you plan to stay in Gorgeous Town for a long time and do odd jobs for Li Yan every day? Tiandao Lan said, we have no other choice. In this heavenly earth we are unregistered residents. According to the rules here, unless it's Taoist Master King Pill, otherwise being an unregistered resident would be very inconvenient. That Li Yan is actually very easy to talk to. She wants us to do some odd jobs for her here, and in return she will help us with our identity. Alas, senior brother Wang Lu, if you are also doing a task in Gorgeous Town, you must help us. Wang Lu apologetically smiled. I'm sorry, I'm going to leave Gorgeous Town soon. A king pill level city is a bit inefficient for me. But before I leave, I can help you talk to Li Yan and see if she can solve your household registration problem as soon as possible. Senior brother Wang Lu, you're really the best. Lin Wang was pleasantly surprised and threw herself at him. It's just that in the blink of an eye, a few pieces of her clothes were gone, revealing a large area of her snow-white skin. Wang Lu took a step back and calmly dodged. Tiandao Lan softly said, "After this farewell, we don't know when we can meet again. Don't you want to leave some memories? It's not good to have sex with each other after we part. But, we'll miss you." Li Qingxi softly said. "Yeah, you too, Sister Wu too. After we part, we won't be able to see each other again. Even our letters are getting fewer and fewer. We are actually very sad." Seeing that these girls were actually on the verge of crying while talking, Wang Lu was too lazy to care whether they were acting or serious. He hurriedly took out another big killer weapon. "Since you just want to leave some memories to relieve your loneliness, then use this." He reached into his mustard seed bag and took out a thick stack of video crystal stones. Among them, the images of his master Wang Wu's naked body could be found everywhere. "These are for you. I wish you a happy practice of telepathic finger." After bidding farewell to the several junior sisters of Yin and Yang School, Wang Lu went to the Temple of Heaven again. Li Yan was really easy to talk to and soon agreed to solve the identity problem for Tiandao Lan and the others. Then Wang Lu directly left Chongqing City and rode his sword toward the Palace of Heaven. The Palace of Heaven was the largest city within thousands of miles and was also one of the important strongholds of the Temple of Heaven for many years. The one who controlled the Temple of Heaven was Moonless Harmonious Sky, who was ranked 7th among the 9 heavens of the Temple of Heaven. He had entered the high-level sequence and was an out-and-out overlord. According to the information obtained from the conversation with Li Yan at the table, Moonless Harmonious Sky was likely to be a deity stage expert. For someone who had just stabilized his cultivation in the middle grade of King Pill, his level was a bit too high. But wasn't it interesting if his level was particularly high? Chapter 552. This is the Palace of Heaven. Worthy of being Harmonious Heaven City, it already has the imposing manner of a demon king's fortress. Standing outside the Palace of Heaven, Wang Lu sincerely sighed with emotion at the Palace of Heaven, which was one of the top 10 cities on heavenly earth. The Palace of Heaven was extremely large. From the periphery of the city to the center of the city, the radiation radius was at least more than 100 miles, and the population was in the tens of millions. It was one of the largest cities in the vicinity. However, the core of the Palace of Heaven was a floating castle with a radius of no more than 3 miles. The castle was built in the sky above the center of the city, and it was called Moon Capital. Every time night fell, Moon Capital would gather the moonlight in the entire Palace of Heaven, so that the city could no longer see the slightest bit of moonlight, and this was because of the personal preference of the master of the Temple of Heaven, Moonless Harmonious Heaven. Her name was Moonless, so she did not want her subordinates to see the moon at night. Her logic was crude and simple, and it also made Wang Lu have a pessimistic expectation for this meeting before the meeting. After staying in the heavenly earth for a period of time, he had a more detailed understanding of this place. In his view, this Temple of Heaven was undoubtedly the unquestionable overlord of this place, but due to various considerations, it did not make this overlord status obvious. For example, every city in the heavenly earth had a corresponding city lord as the person in charge, and the person in charge was usually not the same as the master of the local temple. For example, the palace lord of the Palace of Heaven was not moonless. However, here came the problem. A city had both a city lord and a Temple of Heaven, so who had the final say in the end? The answer was the Temple of Heaven. Although the nominal ruler of the city was the city lord, the Temple of Heaven had the right to control the city lord, and when necessary, it could participate in the major matters of the city management. And what supported this strange ruling structure was the absolute force of the Temple of Heaven. The Palace Lord of the Palace of Heaven was a Yuanying stage master, but Moonless Harmonious Heaven was a Taoist master of deity stage. How could it be easy to make the Palace Lord speak louder than Moonless? Of course, the heavenly earth was vast and had a large population. There were always special cases. For example, Li Yan of Gorgeous Town did not like to participate in the mundane affairs. The management of the city was completely thrown to the city lord. She was alone in the Temple of Heaven. In fact, this should be the original intention of the Temple of Heaven. The clergy only needed to serve the heaven and manage their own cultivation. But this truth obviously did not work in the Palace of Heaven. The moon capital that blotted out the sky had fully reflected the absolute strength of the Temple of Heaven here, It must be known that just below Moon Capital was the residence of the palace master of the Palace of Heaven. Not to mention that the moonlight could not be seen at night, even the sunlight during the day was blocked. It was the same as being trampled underfoot. Moonless style of doing things was also evident. Dealing with such a person was indeed an art, so Wang Lu had done his homework in advance. Not only did he take a detour to Tsangtian City, he also prepared a few gifts. Hopefully these preparations would allow him to get what he wanted. This moonless harmonious heaven was once a fierce general who fought in the front line of the invasion of the lower realm. She had personally beheaded no less than hundreds of chaotic world generals. In a time of crisis, she did not hesitate to risk her life and sacrificed half of her body to permanently smash a passage to the lower realm. Thus, she was promoted by the Temple of Heaven as an exception and became the real master of the Palace of Heaven. Moreover, she lived here for a long time like a vassal king. No matter how overbearing such a person was in other aspects, at least when it came to the chaotic world and the topic of war, she was undoubtedly an expert. And Wang Lu happened to have a lot of questions about the chaotic world that he wanted to ask. Last time at Li Yan's banquet, Wang Lu had too many thoughts and doubts. After entering the city with Li Yan's letter of introduction, Wang Lu and Lu Li were quickly led into Moon Capital by the guards, but Moonless did not immediately meet them. The guards led them into a lounge where there were already no less than 100 people waiting. The spacious lounge seemed to be crowded. Wang Lu and Lu Li couldn't even find a place to sit. Moon Capital is indeed worthy. Wang Lu softly sighed with emotion. The people waiting here were all guests who came to visit Moonless, either for official or private affairs. Most of these people's cultivation base was not low. There were more than 20 people who were at King Pill level, and even 2 of them were at Yuaning stage. Although they were just rookie Yuaning stage cultivators who had just crossed the threshold, they were still Yuaning stage cultivators. Right now, they were still arranged to be crowded in this narrow lounge, which showed how busy Moon Capital was. Before entering Moon Capital, Wang Lu had sensed with his primordial spirit that the main residence of the Palace of Heaven below Moon Capital was sparsely populated. Are you also here to visit Lady Moonless? As soon as Wang Lu and Lu Li stood still, they heard someone talking next to them. Aha! Wang Lu nodded his head. Where are you from? I am Hua Qingshan, a wandering nun from the Temple of God of Shiyun Mountain. Wang Lu turned his head and saw a girl with a bright smile but even more brightly dressed. She was wearing a coarse short shirt and a pair of fluffy trousers. There were several patches on her clothes, densely packed together like mosaics. She was dressed like a commoner who couldn't be more impoverished, but every patch on her body was shining brightly. They were all expensive fabrics woven from the 5-star spirit threads. This kind of gorgeous patch dress was really rare. Even in the fashion capital of 9 regions, such a design was rare. Wang Lu was curious and could not help but be lost in thought. Hua Qingshan giggled and said, "Does it look good? I designed it. This time, I came to visit Lady Moonless in the hope that she would approve me to promote this set of clothes in the vicinity." Wang Lu could not help but ask, "Why do you want to promote this?" "Because the original design is not attractive." Hua Qingshan sighed helplessly and took out another set of clothes. It was also a coarse blouse full of patches which looked very shabby. According to the original regulations of the Temple of Heaven, we wandering monks are responsible for walking in the secular world, soliciting alms and preaching. During this period, our standard uniform is like this. The original intention is to let the wandering monks reflect the noble character and unquestionable integrity of the Temple of Heaven in the process of wandering, so that more people have confidence in us. But now, when people see you in such a shabby dress, they avoid you like the plague. In some places, the wandering monks are even more excessive. They don't even pay attention to personal hygiene. The reputation of the Temple of Heaven is ruined. Wang Lu inwardly thought, you wandering monks who are supposed to be poor, actually have a bad reputation by wearing gold and silver. However, when he thought of this moon capital that blotted out the sky, what could a mere gold patch do to you? In fact, the people below have reported to the higher-ups many times hoping to change the past rules, but the higher-ups have always refused, saying that this violates the fundamental purpose of the Temple of Heaven. Alas, so we have to find ways to reform and innovate by ourselves. Here, this is the result of my innovation. Hua Qingshan proudly stuck out her chest. Although it is different from the standard illustration, it does not violate the written regulations at all. Anyway, the Book of Rites of the Heaven only stipulates the material of the clothes, but it does not specify in detail what kind of material to use for the patches. I believe that if it can be tested in the Palace of Heaven, it will be very popular. Good luck. Hua Qingshan smiled, Speaking of which, I still have a few sets here to test. Do you need them? I can see that your cultivation base and temperament are not bad, so you should also be the person in charge of a temple, right? With that, Hua Qingshan simply began to promote her own products. Wang Lu politely declined. However, after this dialogue, Wang Lu increasingly felt that this Temple of Heaven seemed to be very similar to some organization in his impression. Of course, this was not a problem. Anyway, he was not a local resident, so it was not worthwhile to care about other people's political structure. The problem was that he came here to seek knowledge, but at present, among the people who visited Moonless, there were only a few people who sought knowledge, and most of them were for policy. It was not a good thing for him to mix with this group of people. Moreover, as a highly politicized master of the Temple of Heaven, he was afraid that he had long lost interest in seeking knowledge and so on. Li Yan didn't know how many years ago she became friends with Moonless. She thought that Moonless was a cultivator who yearned for the immortal path in the past, but she didn't expect the world to change. Thinking of this, Wang Lu even considered giving up this route. Anyway, this world was very big and there might not be only Li Yan, Moonless. However, at this moment the door of the lounge was suddenly opened. A girl in a luxurious white dress with an indifferent face pushed the door and looked at Wang Lu. Lady Moonless has summoned you. Us? Wang Lu was quite surprised. The others were equally shocked. This girl actually jumped the queue. Moreover, she was personally appointed by Lady Moonless to jump the queue. What was the relationship between them and Lady Moonless? It must be known that there were two Taoist masters of Yuanying stage who were still waiting patiently. In theory, it would be their turn after 3 days, but the latest waiting time was at least a week. Why did she do that? Unfortunately, the maid in white had already frowned impatiently. Hurry up, Lady Moonless' time is very precious. Under the guidance of the waiter, Wang Lu left the lounge and went deep into the core of Moon Capital. However, not long after following the maid, Wang Lu felt that something was wrong, because they had already passed the reception room, but the maid continued to move forward. Hey, aren't we supposed to meet in the reception room? The maid in white turned around and glared at Wang Lu. Shut up and follow me obediently. Wang Lu couldn't help but sigh. What a fierce domestic dog. The blue veins on the forehead of the maid in white were bulging, and her murderous aura was slightly exposed. Wang Lu was not polite and looked down at her condescendingly. Tisk, 1 black, 2 yellow, 3 flowers and 4 white. It's understandable that the lowest class of things doesn't know etiquette. The maid in white glared at Wang Lu for a long time, but finally swallowed hard and forcibly suppressed her anger. Be careful with your words and actions. This is the residence of Lady Harmonious Heaven. No one is allowed to speak at will without permission. Then she walked forward quickly and led the way in front. After a while, they had entered the range of Moonless residence in Moon Capital, so Wang Lu realized that the place chosen by Moonless to meet the guest was her bedroom. It seemed that Li Yan and she really had a deep friendship. With just a letter of introduction, she could let Moonless have a private meeting with someone. Not long after, the maid in white brought Wang Lu to the door of the bedroom. At the door, 2 maids in black opened the door, so Wang Lu finally saw the long-known Lady Moonless Harmonious Heaven. A living dead with half of her body turned into bones. Chapter 553. In the bedroom, a woman with half a human face and half a skeleton was sitting cross-legged on the couch. Moonless Harmonious Sky, ranked 7th in the 9 heaven ranks set by the Temple of Heaven. She was a powerhouse with great prestige in the entire heavenly earth, and the actual ruler of tens of millions of people in the Palace of Heaven. In Wang Lu's expectation, she should be a heroic overlord. However, what he saw in front of him formed a very sharp contrast with his expectation. The legends about Moonless mentioned that she suffered injuries in the war with the chaotic world and never healed them in her life. He thought that they were just some eye-catching scars which could be used as a medal to show off her martial arts, but unexpectedly, this Moonless was really thorough in doing things. The so-called sacrifice of half of her body was actually literal. The right half of Moonless' body was intact, but the left half was a skeleton. Part of her body was covered by her dress, but her head was exposed. Moonless' intact right eye was tightly closed, but the left eye socket of the skull was shining with a red light. The situation was extremely frightening. This honor alone was completely unexpected. For Wang Lu, all unexpected situations were bad news. The other party was a battle-hardened Taoist master of deity stage. In theory, his illusion technique could be seen at a glance. Even if she was essentially just a creation of the immortal dreamland and was not as good as a genuine deity stage master, she was still a deity stage master. Before he came here, he had combined some rare materials left in his mustard seed bag, plus the props that he bought at a high price in Sky City to greatly strengthen his illusion technique. However, it was still unknown whether he could hide it from the eyes of a Taoist master of deity stage. Without Li Yan's letter, Wang Lu would not have rashly come here. However, everything was basically based on a precise plan. If there was an unexpected situation, it would test his ability to adapt to the situation. Of course, this ability was also available to Wang Lu, so he calmly entered the room and greeted them with a smile. And what greeted him was the hearty laughter of Moonless. "You are the two little guys that Li Yan introduced? Ah, come and sit down." Such a kind gesture was even more unexpected. Wang Lu even wondered if there was a publicity commissioner of her Temple of Heaven in this bedroom. As long as they recorded the conversation in the bedroom, they could publish a report tomorrow with the title, "Lord Harmonious Heaven Meets the Grassroots People." This would show how approachable Lord Harmonious Heaven is. However, it was clear that no one else was waiting in Moonless' bedroom. Even the black-clothed maid, who had the highest position in the black and yellow sequence, could only wait outside the door. It was clear that this was a very private meeting. Don't stand on ceremony. After Wang Lu and Lu Li sat down on the praying mat, Moonless said, "Li Yan and I have been through life and death together. Although I haven't seen her for decades, I always remember her kindness. She said in the letter that the two of you are her new friends. Li Yan does not make friends easily. Since you can get her approval, it is equivalent to getting my approval. I treat you guys as friends so you don't have to be so reserved. Please keep the gifts, I don't need them." After saying that, Moonless slightly restrained his smile. "Li Yan said in the letter that you two have questions about cultivation that you want to ask me?" "Yes, in recent years, there are fewer and fewer people who have the heart and sincerity to cultivate immortality, and more people are obsessed with fame and fortune." Hearing this, Wang Lu just wanted to laugh, thinking, "You, a standard bureaucrat politician, have the nerve to criticize others?" Moonless seemed to have seen through Wang Lu's thoughts and slowly replied, "To deal with worldly affairs, I only use the left side of the dead body." Wang Lu froze for a moment and then said with a smile, "Very well, then I won't be polite. First of all, I want to ask, do you want to comprehend the immortal path through the convergence of life and death?" Upon hearing this, Moonless opened his right eye. "No wonder Li Yan spoke so highly of you in the letter. Those mediocre people only think that I'm showing off my scars, but they never thought that with my current status, who else do I need to show off? You're right, I do use life and death to approach the immortal path." With that, Moonless suddenly laughed. "Apart from that, what else can you see? Life and death, yin and yang, black and white. All the contradictory and unified concepts should be reflected in you. Your left and right halves are entrusted with quite a lot of things. It should be said that you're trying to use this method to make up for your congenital defects?" Hearing this, Moonless burst into laughter. "Ah, well said. No wonder a talent like you would wander outside the Temple of Heaven system. That old-fashioned theology can't satisfy you." Wang Lu said, "No wonder you and Li Yan, who are friends of life and death, haven't seen each other for decades. Compared to that lazy but devout Li Yan, you should be tied to the stake. But from another point of view, if not, you would not be qualified to control the Palace of Heaven, a big city. For an organization in charge of the regime, idealists are not qualified to rise to a high position." After receiving Moonless' encouragement, Wang Lu simply bluntly said, "We are not perfect creatures. I think all things in this world are divided into yin and yang, only we have no gender. When I asked Li Yan, she only said that it was the will of the heaven, but I don't think so. So, I want to ask Master Moonless, what is your opinion?" The will of the heaven. Unexpectedly, after not seeing her for decades, Li Yan has learned to deceive herself. Moonless suddenly sneered, "How does a human middle immortal come to be? Other people don't know, but how could she not know? She just doesn't want to admit it." With that, Moonless closed his right eye and said in a deep voice, "You guessed it right, human beings do have a gender distinction and we are the yin side. In theory there should be a yin side corresponding to us." Wang Lu nodded and said, "Sure enough. But why does the Temple of Heaven deliberately conceal this news? This is not good for the development of heavenly earth, right? Obviously imperfect, but they think they are perfect. Obviously they have a natural yin physique, but they think they have both yin and yang. This cognitive deviation is a great obstacle to cultivation." "You want to know?" Moonless asked with interest, "Are you sure you want to know the answer? For you, since you have guessed the yin and yang division, you will no longer be affected by the cognitive barrier, so why bother to explore the secret behind it? Curiosity is the driving force of progress." "Well said. That being the case, I will let you have a look." With that, Moonless stood up and clapped his hands. Wang Lu only saw a slender and soft palm touch a pale bone claw twice, and then the bedroom door was pushed open by the maid in black. I want to take the guest to see my collection. You lead the way. Moonless collection was built in the underground part of Moon Capital. The group of people, led by the maid in black, walked slowly in the deep corridor. Along the way there were countless kinds of traps. The maid in black who led the way used more than 30 kinds of props as keys to avoid them one by one, and finally led the 3 people to the entrance of the collection. Normally, no matter how precious the treasure was, it would not be so heavily guarded. Moreover, the really important things were generally carried by the cultivators. Therefore, seeing the lineup at the entrance, Wang Lu faintly felt that what he would see next would not be anything good. Sure enough, after opening the door of the collection, the maid who led the way hurriedly retreated, as if she had a deep fear of the things in the collection. Moonless stepped in generously. Behind the door was a spacious and deep hall. As Moonless entered, it suddenly became brightly lit, so that people could see the collection in the collection. The moment his vision became clear, Wang Lu could not help but close his eyes. This was truly an unexpected sight. How do you feel? Moonless' voice came from the front. These are the trophies I collected in the war 45 years ago. Any one of them is an outstanding master in the chaotic world. This is the real military merit worth showing off. The scars on my body are only a shame. What's there to show off? Wang Lu nodded silently. With the light around the collection, he could clearly see dozens of crystal troughs in the hall, and the corpses of chaotic creatures lying quietly in them. Each of those chaotic creatures looked ferocious and had their own characteristics. Some had fangs turned outward, some had an eye in the middle of their forehead. But the basic outline was very clear. They were humanoid and they were full of muscles and broad bones. They were very standard, male. I guess this is the answer you want. Why does the Temple of Heaven want to hide the division between yin and yang? Because we can't tell the world that your other half is a chaotic creature. So that's how it is. This is indeed a secret that can't be made public. While carefully observing the corpses in the collection, Wang Lu asked, generally speaking, creatures need to mate with yin and yang to reproduce. We have the heaven to give us new life, but what about the chaotic world? They are only males, how do they reproduce? I see that the corpses of these chaotic creatures, in addition to the basic outline, often have the characteristics of other animals such as ox horns, sheep hooves, horse tails, and so on. Could it be? Moonless coldly snorted and said, when the need to reproduce overwhelms everything, they will naturally look for all possible mothers. Humph, dirty lower realm scum. Wang Lu looked for a while and then asked, strange, these chaotic creatures are only male? Can't they give birth to females? I don't know. For thousands of years, we have never really set foot on the land of the lower realm. Every time we come, we kill all the invaders. The filthy land of the lower realm is fatal to us. Wang Lu nodded his head to show that he understood. At the same time, he realized that this immortal dreamland might also be hiding an extremely huge and difficult subplot. To help the chaotic creatures of the lower realm overthrow the heavenly earth and bring the yin and yang back to normal. However, this idea was not convenient to say. He could only think about it in his heart. Just as he was thinking about it, he suddenly heard Moonless said, Li Yan's evaluation of you in the letter is very high, and seeing you today, you really did not let me down. Wang Lu cupped his hands and said, you flatter me. I like you too very much, so you can stay in Moon Capital. Ah? I haven't expanded the harem of Moon Capital for more than 10 years. Today I will make an exception for you too. Wait a minute. Chapter 554. Alas, I should have thought that there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world, let alone in the immortal dreamland that follows the basic principle of equivalent exchange. This moonless enthusiasm has obviously exceeded the necessary limit. I thought she would assign us some more difficult tasks, and we can also take this opportunity to hone our actual combat experience. Unexpectedly, she actually took drastic measures. In a beautifully decorated bedroom, Wang Lu helplessly shrugged his shoulders. Before visiting Moonless, Wang Lu never thought that the plot would escalate to this point. Before he could get any information from Moonless, he was forcibly detained by the other party as a member of the harem. Not long ago, when Moonless domineeringly proposed to take Wang Lu and Lu Li into the harem, Wang Lu thought that she was joking. Her original intention was to keep the two of them for dinner. After all, for a person who only had one breast left to have such an interest, she was definitely a perverted traitor. But soon Moonless laughed and left. Then, the black-clad maids solemnly prepared the bedroom and related necessities for the two of them in Moon Capital. They also specially wrote a warm reminder, stating several issues that needed to be paid attention to when getting along with Lady Moonless, including the bedtime schedule, skill requirements and so on. It dazzled and made people deeply admire her. Then Wang Lu realized that Moonless was serious. Moonless was indeed a high-level bureaucrat of the Temple of Heaven. Things that seemed licentious and tyrannical to others were taken for granted by her. It made people have to sigh with emotion that this was the role model of a bureaucrat. No matter when, she always maintained a strong possessive desire, which was in sharp contrast to Aya, that good-for-nothing. After sighing with emotion, it was time to think about countermeasures. The harem was not suitable to stay for a long time. Although the harem route was undoubtedly a shortcut to get magical treasures and methods. But with Wang Lu's identity and vision, how could he want to be a *** for others? Not to mention that Moonless was just a deity stage. Even if she was a true immortal descending to the mortal world, Wang Lu would still consider how to find an opportunity to kill her and then pick up the loot. However, even if he wanted to escape, he had to find the right time. Although he looked down on the collection of a deity stage, he had to admit that he was still far from being able to confront a deity stage head-on. If he angered Moonless, he might not even be able to escape. Therefore, just now, when Moonless domineeringly took him and Lu Li into the harem, Wang Lu didn't confront it head-on. Instead, he agreed for the time being and slowly plotted. With the remaining props in the mustard seed bag, as long as he figured out the structure of Moon Capital's formation, he was sure that he could find a flaw and escape when Moonless was not paying attention. Now all he had to do was wait for the right time. While thinking about it, Wang Lu flipped through the warm tips provided by the black-clothed maid, trying to find any flaws in Moonless that he could exploit. However, when he flipped to the end, he could not help but be shocked. What is this? Harem list. Looking at the pages filled with names, Wang Lu was shocked. When he flipped them over, it was another full page. Adding the 2 pages together, the number of people in the harem was over 100. No wonder it was written in the warm tips that the time to serve was about once a month. He initially thought that Moonless' demand was not that strong, but it turned out that she couldn't even get a shift. Wait a minute, there were more than 100 harem beauties, but they were arranged once a month. Does she need 3 or 4 people to accompany her every day? What kind of explosive waist strength is this? While he was sighing with emotion, the bedroom door was suddenly pushed open from the outside, and 4 or 5 female cultivators with different appearances came in. The one in the lead looked arrogant and domineering as she walked into the room. She glanced around and then focused her eyes on Wang Lu and Lu Li. Are you guys the newcomers? In just one sentence, Wang Lu had roughly guessed the identity of these people, his new colleagues. They were also the old drivers in the harem. Wang Lu secretly sensed them with his primordial spirit and found that they were just a group of King Pill stage dregs. Thus, he casually cupped his hands toward them as a courtesy, but what he got in return was a sneer. The woman in the lead narrowed her slender eyes and chuckled. Previously, I heard the servants say that the 2 new sisters are not from the Temple of Heaven, so they don't know the rules very well. Originally, I blamed the servants for speaking without knowing the immensity of heaven and earth, but I didn't expect to see it with my own eyes. Simply unbelievable. How could such barbaric and unruly people like you be qualified to serve the Lady in Moon Capital? Lady Harmonious Heaven manages the Palace of Heaven and the surrounding 3 mountains and 15 cities, so her mission and responsibility are great. If she is in a bad mood because of the 2 of you not serving her well, then you 2 will die. Therefore, I think you 2 should first learn the basic etiquette with the servants for a few months, which is also considered as big sister's consideration for you. While speaking, the several followers around the woman had come forward, grabbed the arms of Wang Lu and Lu Li, and were about to drag them out. This set of business process was too familiar to them. Basically, every newcomer had to go through such a process. After receiving a show of strength, only then could they honestly stay dormant in the harem. Moonless' vision was quite high. In recent years, the people who entered the harem were all talented and unruly people. Thus, it was the mission of the old drivers in the harem to break the lofty and unyielding character of these people, so that those who once had self-respect would shamelessly roll under Moonless' feet. Of course, in addition to serving Lady Moonless, they would more or less have some selfishness. After all, every new harem beauty was a direct competitor. For these female cultivators who regarded the harem as their heaven, Moonless' favor was everything. However, her favor was, after all, limited. If there was one more person, the others would inevitably get less. When the old drivers were ready to make their move, Lu Li looked at Wang Lu at a loss, not knowing whether she should resist or not. However, Wang Lu frowned and began to quickly sort out his thoughts. The current scene, no matter how he looked at it, was like a scene in a harem fight. Two humble but kind-hearted mistresses were pushed aside by the narrow-minded main harem. And according to the orthodox way of development, after the two of them experienced torture, they finally moved a certain valley hero in the harem with their pure and kind quality. On one hand, the hero saved their lives and on the other hand taught them the way to survive in the harem. Finally, the hero died miserably in the hands of the main harem for various reasons, and the two heroines who inherited the will of the valley hero began their long journey of revenge. Such a script was completely predictable. After all, from the point of view of the harem route alone, relying on the advantage of outsiders to get treasures from Moonless was too easy, and this was impossible to conform to the principle of equivalent exchange in the immortal dreamland. Therefore, the harem route was bound to face all kinds of difficulties, and the harem fight must be one of the main lines. If this route was unfolded, it could be imagined that there would be this and that kind of tragic story. At least, Wang Lu had come up with 7 or 8 interesting routes, but he was not interested in putting them into practice. If it was before his transmigration, he might still be in the mood to play with these cold and empty women who could only be visited once a month, such as setting off a trend of raising dogs in the harem. But now he was in a hurry, so he preferred to fight rather than fight in the harem. Previously, he was worried that the road of fighting in the immortal dreamland was forcibly interrupted by Moonless into a harem fight route, but as a result, this group of people actually came to his door and forced him to change the route back. A group of people who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth came to provoke him. If he didn't make a move, it would be a waste of his hard work. With his current strength, it was unrealistic to contend with Moonless, but in Moon Capital, apart from Moonless, even if it was Moonless' strongest assistants who were in the middle level of Yuanying stage, Wang Lu was confident that he could forcibly fight them. As for the group of waste wood in the harem, it was not a problem. In his view, it was simply experience points that were delivered to his door. The only thing he needed to take into account was Moonless' own reaction. But as soon as she left, this group of B***cheese followed her in. If there was no connection, it was probably because Moonless was also observing his reaction. Then I'll give you a good show to watch. Anyway, even if Moonless herself personally came down, Wang Lu also had a unique skill to save his life. After thinking about all this, Wang Lu no longer hesitated. With a roar, a trace of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi was condensed in his hand from the king pill, and then he punched the woman next to him. Although the other party was also a king pill cultivator, how could she be compared with Wang Lu, who was a king pill cultivator? In a blink of an eye, her nose was smashed by the fist wrapped in primal chaos sword chi. The woman on the other side was stunned, and then her jaw was broken by the same punch and her broken teeth fell to the ground. The two were, after all, king pill level Taoist masters, but they were disfigured in just one encounter. The woman who was the leader was stunned, and her heart was surging with stormy waves. The strength of Wang Lu's cultivation was still secondary. He dared to make a move in the harem of Moon Capital. This was the problem that made her view of the world waver. Moonless' temperament was strict and almost violent. She was extremely strict with her subordinates. If there was a little mistake, even if there was a flaw in the clothes, she would be severely punished, not to mention openly violating the ban in the harem and fighting. This was simply courting death. Who the hell were these two newcomers? She thought that they were the new favorite concubines of Master Moonless. One was a middle-grade king pill, and the other was a peak shoot-on. Unexpectedly, the other party was so fearless. How dare you wantonly commit murder in Moon Capital? Don't you want to live anymore? The woman calmed her mind and asked in a stern voice. At the same time, she quietly took out a yin and yang heart protection mirror. It was a high-grade magic treasure that Moonless had given her after a sexual intercourse. Wang Lu's 2 punches just now had shattered the facial bones of the 2 king pill cultivators, and their protective chi seemed to have disappeared. She saw this and all the hair on her body stood up. However, the next moment Wang Lu punched her again, and the speed was so fast that it made her heart palpitate. She was at the peak of Jindan stage, but in front of this punch she was as fragile as a piece of paper. The spells of the 5 elements that once made her famous were all thrown out of the sky. She could only hope that the yin-yang heart protection mirror could save her life. Bang! After a muffled sound, the woman flew out, and her body hit the wall of the corridor outside the bedroom. A mouthful of blood spurted out more than 10 feet away. Huh? Wang Lu slowly retracted his fist and at the same time he took a long breath. The joy in his heart was indescribable. Chapter 555. The news that a riot broke out in the harem of Moon Capital shocked many people. Under the coercion of Moonless' harmonious sky, the tens of millions of people in the entire palace of heaven were trembling with fear. As for moonless harmonious sky, there was no need to mention the moon capital, where the cold and oppressive atmosphere had damaged the mental state of many cultivators who had just arrived. However, the riot did break out. The harem guards who heard the news had gathered 50 people in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, but when they arrived at the scene was already unbearable to look at. There were more than 10 harem concubines lying on the ground. Most of them were injured by iron fists, there were very clear fist marks on their faces, and then they were unconscious. There was a river of nosebleeds on the ground, and there were even a few strands of gray mucus that looked like brain juice. It was really a tragic sight. At the same time, there were 7 or 8 people shivering around the foot of the wall, including the harem concubines and maids. The murderer who caused all this was standing in the middle of the river of blood, wiping his fists with the bedsheets in the bedroom, with a satisfied look on his face. It's really refreshing. Although they are just a group of small fries, I feel that my experience value has increased by more than 2 bars. Wang Lu put down his bloodshot and hot fists and sighed with relief. A harem concubine said with a trembling voice, do you know what you are doing? How dare you act violently in Moon Capital? You will never be reincarnated. Wang Lu glanced at her and said, I have always respected family planning. The concubine did not hear what Wang Lu said at all. When Wang Lu turned his eyes, she was so scared that she screamed, Guards, take her down. No, kill her. She has been contaminated by the chaotic creatures of the lower realm. The captain of the guards, Hanyu, sighed at that time. This group of harem beauties, they didn't have any other skills, but their ability to stir up trouble was imprinted in their bones. They were scared to the point that their skirts were wet, and they weren't clear-headed, but they were able to talk about using someone else to do their dirty work. It was truly admirable. This yelling concubine was taken into the harem by Lady Moonless 5 years ago. At that time she was a famous wandering monk in Wuxia. When she first entered the King Pill, she was in high spirits. Who knew that after 5 years she had become crafty and mean, and the immortal spirit she once had was lost. And Hanyu had seen too many such people. Most of the hundreds of harem members had gone through the same path. At the beginning Hanyu was very confused. Why did the wise and powerful Lady Moonless let her harem degenerate to this extent? But later she gradually understood. Especially when she happened to see Moonless showing an incomparably cold gaze to her own empress, Hanyu realized that perhaps this was the scene that Moonless wanted. Moonless had never really been moved by the imperial concubines in the harem. Even her possessiveness was not sincere. What she needed was a large harem to support her bureaucratic scene. But she was not interested in the management of the harem at all, so she referred to the most orthodox harem model. Let the concubines diligently fight among themselves and quarrel with each other, while Moonless herself looked on coldly as if watching a play. And over the years, the performance of the actors on the stage had become more and more outstanding. Hanyu felt that the group of people headed by the main concubine Xiaoyun, was exactly the same as the harem concubines in novels. Unfortunately, there was one more actor on the stage today who did not perform according to the script. Looking at the nosebleed, Hanyu felt very complicated. On the one hand, she sincerely admired this person's courage, and at the same time she couldn't help but feel happy. Most of those who were knocked unconscious on the ground were usually arrogant and disrespectful to the guards. But on the other hand, because of her duty, she couldn't let that person act violently. Hanyu didn't have the courage to directly kill the other party, because she wasn't sure whether this person should be killed or not. Not long ago, Lady Moonless had personally taken these 2 people into the harem. Who knew what she was thinking? So it was better to find a way to trap them first, and then let Lady Moonless deal with them. As for whether she could take them down or not. Hey, if a dignified Taoist master of Yuanying stage couldn't even take down a middle-grade King Pill, then she didn't need to work in Moon Capital. Thinking of this, Hanyu clenched the short cane in her hand and took a step forward. Suddenly, the whole bedroom turned upside down, and the scene had been replaced by a vast grassland. At the same time, the dark clouds were densely covering the earth, so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Only the thunder from time to time brought a little light. After a while, heavy rain poured down, as if the sky was broken and the Milky Way was leaking. Bathed in this cold rainstorm, Wang Lu couldn't distinguish the authenticity of the rain. Original magical ability? It had been a long time since Wang Lu used this skill to change the sky in an instant. Because recently Wang Lu's fights were all short and quick, and the outcome was basically decided within a few moves. Whether it was him or his opponent, neither of them would resort to their original magical ability, this kind of big killer weapon. Although the power of original magical ability was strong, it was essentially a means to delay the rhythm, and the consumption was huge, so no one was willing to use it easily. Unexpectedly, this Yuanying stage cultivator, who was the captain of the guards, was so decisive that she used her original magical ability right away. Moreover, judging from the scene of the grassland rainstorm, the power of this original magical ability was quite good. Wang Lu didn't know that Han Yu actually wanted to control the situation and delay time, waiting for Lady Moonless to arrive. He was thinking, could it be that the captain of the guards could see that he had a lot of hidden cards? If so, the strength evaluation of the captain of the guards should be raised by a few levels. Powerful cultivation base was not terrible, but powerful cultivation base and shrewd and careful, that was very terrible. In this moment of hesitation, the rainstorm became heavier and heavier. Lu Li, who was next to him, could not help but take 2 steps closer. The girl who was still in peak Shudan stage could not withstand the pressure of a Taoist master of Yuanying stage, especially since she was good at offense and bad at defense. Before the King Pill stage was formed to protect her body, she almost had no resistance in front of a Yuanying stage cultivator. Wang Lu looked at Lu Li, took her into his arms, and then propped up his non-phase sword defense. In the dark rainy night, the golden sword defense was like the center of the world, dazzling. However, the person who raised the rainstorm was always hidden in the dark. With the cultivation base of Yuanying stage, against a Jindan and a Shudan, he did not hesitate to use the stealth backstab method. This was no longer using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken, but rather using a holy sword to kill a chicken. Wang Lu was silent in the rainstorm for a while, and then he let out a long breath. His golden core operated, and the original magical ability that was hidden in the deepest part of the golden core was launched. The King Pill level original magical ability could not directly contend against Yuanying stage cultivator. Therefore, the red light in the sky above the grassland flickered twice and then fell silent. In the end, the sky did not change. However, soon, a bloody wind blew across the grassland, and the surrounding grass solidified and hardened under the blowing of the bloody wind. The weeds were like sharp swords rising straight to the sky. Han Yu, who was hiding in the grass, was aghast. She had seen a lot of original magical abilities, but the King Pill level original magical ability that could exist independently in the Yuanying stage level original magical ability was extremely rare. In particular, when the other party's bloody wind blew, the whole grassland seemed to no longer belong to her. In particular, she saw with her own eyes that in just a few breaths of time, the weeds beside her extended, solidified, and finally, under the nourishment of the rain, turned into an emerald green sword with a rich metallic luster. Even her breathing stopped for a moment. The next moment, the sharp sword flashed and stabbed toward her. Although the grass sword was crushed by the Yuanying stage cultivator's protective aura shield the moment it left the ground, this scene still shocked Han Yu. What kind of magical ability was this? It could actually corrode her original magical ability? The original magical ability could only be covered by a more powerful and higher-level magical ability. Just now, the brief change of color in the sky meant that although the other party's original magical ability was strong, it was still not the opponent of Yuanying stage cultivator. However, the subsequent corrosion and assimilation of the grassland meant that the level of the other party's magical ability was extremely high. She could not wait any longer. Han Yu decided to end the battle quickly. At this moment, she felt that there were hidden dangers everywhere around her, and her torrential rain could do nothing to the other party's golden sword defense. She could not win by relying on the magical ability alone, so Han Yu had to do it herself. With a thought, her body melted in the torrential rain, and in the blink of an eye, she got rid of the threat of the grassland sword forest and approached Wang Lu. However, when she got closer, she found that the golden sword defense seemed to have no flaws at all. Unless she used the power of Yuanying stage to forcibly suppress it, there was no way to break it. Then she would use force to suppress it. Han Yu whistled, and the torrential rain became even more violent. After a moment, the sound of rolling tides came from afar, and the grassland actually set off a storm. The huge waves that were hundreds of feet high came pressing like a mountain, really overwhelming. This was Han Yu's understanding of water. Ever since she was cultivating in the deep mountains, she saw with her own eyes that the torrential rain broke down a mountain, and the floodwaters rolled down the gravel, sweeping away everything along the way. She then condensed this original magical ability. When she pushed her magical power to the extreme, she could crush everything with the pressure of the water. Wang Lu softly snorted. Regarding this storm, he did not want to fight it head-on. Using his middle-level King Pill cultivation base to compete with a Taoist master of Yuanying stage in terms of magical power was simply courting death. "Luli, give me a hand." Luli didn't speak, but she already held the skybreaker in her hand. Her whole magical power was condensed on the sword, waiting for Wang Lu's order to release the strongest blow in her current stage. Although she often seemed to have lost her mind, after entering the fighting state, Lu Li's keen intuition could guide her to make the correct response in the first place. Seeing this situation, Wang Lu immediately changed his original plan. Instead, based on his intuition, he reached out to hold Lu Li's hand that held the sword. Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting sword chi brewed for a moment and then poured into the skybreaker through the place where the two of them held each other. Suddenly, this immortal sword burst out an unprecedented terrifying fluctuation. The sword wave swept across, and thousands of cracks appeared on the ground within the radius of 300 meters. And this was just the aftermath that was subconsciously released. With the cooperation of Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting sword chi and the skybreaker as the foundation, and then through Lu Li's brilliant sword heart, Wang Lu already felt that his primordial spirit had the tendency to collapse under the resonance. This was not a power that could be controlled by the King Pill stage. Wang Lu didn't dare to wait any longer. He immediately joined hands with Lu Li to send out this sword strike with all his strength. The skybreaker drew a gray line in front of the huge wave that ran through the heaven and earth. At that moment, the heaven and earth stagnated. The roaring wave was blocked by an invisible force for a moment, and time seemed to have stopped. Then, the giant wave split to the left and right, revealing a bottomless canyon in the middle. The flood that Han Yu tried her best to summon was divided into two parts along the gray line. Han Yu flew above the flood and inconceivably watched as the flood that could no longer be closed roared past both sides of Wang Lu's non-phase sword defense. The next moment, a mouthful of blood overflowed from her mouth. As a Taoist master of Yuanying stage, Han Yu's original magical ability had been broken by that sword strike, and she was injured by the backlash. However, the power of Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting sword chi was still not seen the bottom. After a while, even the ground disintegrated, opening up a bottomless crack. The clouds in the sky were unprecedentedly turbulent, and in the darkness, a line of light appeared. Although the Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting sword chi broke out in a flash, its power has penetrated the entire space, causing continuous damage. More and more blood flowed out of Han Yu's mouth. No matter how hard she tried, she could not stop the disintegration of her original magical ability. Finally, the rainy night in the prairie turned into countless fragments. Han Yu staggered a bit and then fell to the ground. However, Wang Lu was not happy at all. Just now, although that sword strike gave him an unprecedented experience, which benefited him and Lu Li endlessly, it also created an unprecedentedly powerful enemy. After Han Yu fell to the ground, in the middle of the room, Moonless has stood in front of her. This Taoist master of deity stage had a faint smile on her face, but from time to time her shaking right hand showed her anger at the scene before her. "Do you have anything to say?" Moonless smilingly asked Wang Lu. Wang Lu had no doubt that her hidden subtext was for him to say his last words. No matter how much Moonless valued him before, this scene was a slap in her face, and a political figure could not allow her face to be dirty. However, Wang Lu was already prepared for this scene. He smiled and said to Moonless, "Your harem needs to be reformed. The original harem fighting system can only cultivate waste that is not commensurate with your reputation, just like those lying at my feet." Wang Lu said with a nasal voice of disdain and then said, "You started your career with military exploits, but your harem has even forgotten the basic fighting skills. Such a harem is empty, but it's laughable." So, Moonless declined to comment on this. "So, after thinking about it, I decided to offer you a strategy." Moonless kicked a fainted concubine at her feet. "Is this the strategy you offered?" Wang Lu said, "Yes, this is part of the strategy. Because from now on, I want the harem to be like a battlefield where strength is respected. Every 5 years, a harem competition will be held in Moon Capital, and the winner will be the harem master for 5 years. In this way, the survival of the fittest can cultivate a harem worthy of your name." Harem competition? Moonless narrowed her eyes and began to seriously consider this unheard of creativity. There had never been such a harem in heavenly earth, but it was undeniably very interesting. In particular, it seemed fun to let her concubines fight each other for the throne of the harem master. "Very good." In the end, Moonless nodded and said, "Since you have this idea, then do it for me." Chapter 556. Senior brother, do you really want to hold a tournament? In the bedroom, Lu Li sat on the bed and curiously asked. Her eyes were full of eagerness to try. Wang Lu said, "Of course it's a good opportunity. Although there are many waste wood in Moonless harem, there are also many experts. The main concubine Xiao Yun, is a Yuanying stage expert. On paper, her strength is stronger than that of the guard captain Han Yu. Unfortunately, after so many years of fighting in the harem, their brains have become stupid. They may not even be able to use 20 to 30% of their ability. Now give them a chance to adjust their state. 5 days later, when the tournament begins, we will have endless experience. Good. Lu Li couldn't help but begin to stroke her own sword, Skybreaker. Although most of the people in the harem had higher cultivation base than her, Lu Li still had a strong desire to fight. She could not wait to fight with everyone, including Wang Lu himself. It was good to take risks and have fun with Wang Lu, but it would be even better if she could have the opportunity to consolidate her cultivation base and refine her sword intent. For Wang Lu, things had to be a bit more complicated. From the beginning, Wang Lu's actions were not simple. The adoption of the whimsical proposal of the harem tournament was not based on luck. According to Moonless temper, it was almost impossible for her to tolerate others' offense, let alone fighting with the concubines in the harem of Moon Capital, and even injuring the guard captain. Let alone Li Yan's friend who wrote the recommendation letter. Even if Li Yan herself was here, Moonless would still be ruthless in order to maintain her dignity. Of course, the idea of the harem tournament was indeed good, but the one who came up with this idea, Wang Lu, at most deserved to die a quick death. He didn't need to be thrown into the dark side of the moon to be tortured before his death. What really made Moonless hold back was the sword strike that broke Han Yu's original magical ability by Wang Lu. With the combined power of Wang Lu and Lu Li, and then perfectly guided by Skybreaker, the power of that sword strike was enough to make most of the Taoist masters of Yuanying stage palpitate. Of course, it was far from being a threat to a soul formation cultivator. If that sword was aimed at Moonless, she wouldn't even need to use a magic treasure. She could block that sword with her physical body alone. However, the point of Wang Lu's sword attack was not to injure the enemy, but to demonstrate a problem. How could a king pill cultivator make such a sword attack? Although there were many king pill cultivators in the world, to be able to slash out such an earth-shattering sword was probably unheard of by many. This kind of king pill could not be a nameless person. The backer behind him was very likely to be terrifying, so Moonless would not take the risk to provoke him. Harmonious Heaven, the 7th rank of the 9 heavens of Temple of Heaven, was indeed powerful, but compared with a person who could cultivate such a powerful king pill, Harmonious Heaven still seemed insignificant. Moonless was arrogant, brutal and headstrong. However, as a political figure she had absolutely qualified political acumen. In the Palace of Heaven she was like a vassal king, so there was no room for her to go further. Therefore she used all her acumen on how to keep her current position. Whether it was the sky-covering moon capital, the extravagance of the wine pool and the forest of meat, or even the huge debauchery and tyrannical harem, they were all means for her to show her ambition to others. Only those who did not move forward would be extravagant, and those who had far-reaching plans would often pretend to be a moral saint. Thus, in the Palace of Heaven, her goal was naturally just a vassal king, and she would not ask for more. At the same time, she would never offend people that she shouldn't offend. It was this complex political motive that made Moonless finally tolerate Wang Lu's rudeness, and even appointed him to complete the preparation for the harem tournament. In the next few days, presumably, Moonless would exhaust her resources to dig out the details of Wang Lu and Lu Li. Of course, it was impossible for her to get any result. However, because she couldn't get the result, she would be afraid to act rashly. With the wisdom of Moonless, she would eventually find that Wang Lu and Lu Li had no backing in the heavenly earth. However, no one knew how long it would take. At least, it was enough for Wang Lu to use this time to use the resources in Moonless' hands to ruthlessly gain a lot of experience. For the current Wang Lu and Lu Li, there was nothing more suitable than a hearty tournament. Most of the opponents were between King Pill stage and Yuanying stage, which was exactly the level that the two of them needed to deal with seriously. They even had to take some risks, but not to the extent that they couldn't deal with it. Moreover, according to the rules of Moonless, life and death in the tournament was up to fate, so they could unscrupulously kill each other. The life and death battle was unusual. After each battle, the benefit was more than 10 times that of an ordinary battle. Of course, the premise was that they didn't suffer irrecoverable serious damage in the battle. It could be said that it was a way of cultivation where risk and benefit coexisted. Only such a growth rate could satisfy the needs of Wang Lu and Lu Li. The Moon Capital Harem tournament kicked off on time 5 days later. The venue was located in the middle of Moon Capital, on the training field belonging to Moonless. Under the careful planning of Wang Lu, although it was only 5 days, the opening ceremony still presented a series of wonderful programs, dazzling and too much for the eyes to take in. The Moon Capital guards around the training field all stared intently. Although the rules of duty did not allow them to make any response, their focused posture still exposed their true thoughts. At the top of the center of the audience, even the always scheming and unsmiling imperial concubine Xiao Yun revealed a smile from time to time. While pointing at the programs and actors on the training field, she talked to Moonless. She was talking and Moonless was listening. From beginning to end, Moonless didn't say a word. When the opening ceremony ended, the first round of the tournament soon began. The actors who were still gorgeously dressed on the training field immediately put on their uniforms and waited for the start of their turn with a solemn look. Even the imperial concubine came down from the stage and put on a light and gorgeous fighting suit. Thus, in the entire audience, except for a few bureaucrats who were deeply trusted by Moonless and Moonless herself, there was no one else. Then in the first match, I will fight against Xiao Morong. In the middle of the training field, Wang Lu, who was both the host and the contestant of the first match, said with a smile. At the same time, a woman with a face full of anger came to the stage and looked at Wang Lu. Her eyes seemed as if they were about to spit fire. Xiao Morong was the imperial concubine who was mistaken by Wang Lu as the imperial concubine 5 days ago and then punched out 10 feet of blood. At that time, she took several of her men to find trouble for Wang Lu and Lu Li. That was also the rule of the elders in the harem to train the newcomers. Who knew that this newcomer completely didn't know what the rules were. With 3 punches, the prestige that Xiao Morong had painstakingly built up in the harem for many years was gone. Those who had seen her nose bleed violently and fall unconscious would no longer have any respect for her. Even her previous backer, concubine Xiao Yun, would no longer see her. Thus, Xiao Morong could no longer find a place in the harem, unless she could defeat this opponent in the martial arts arena and wash away her shame. She had no way out. 5 days was not enough for her to completely recover the spirit, energy and spirit of the Temple of Heaven ascetic nun before she entered the harem, but she still had the confidence to defeat her opponent. Because in Wang Lu's hand was the sword of Mount Kuan, not the Skybreaker. And in Xiao Morong's hand was the spirit sword Faceless Moon that she borrowed from imperial concubine Xiao Yun. Without the Skybreaker, she didn't believe that a mere middle-rank King Pill could make an earth-shattering sword strike. And she, as the peak of King Pill with the help of Faceless Moon, dared to compete with a Taoist master of Yuanying's stage. Under such circumstances she had a chance of winning. In fact, after the start of the battle, Xiao Morong indeed grasped the initiative on the scene for a time. The more than 1 meter long sword Faceless Moon was like a dexterous dagger in her hand. Combined with the Yin and Yang heart protection mirror, it made the martial arts arena constantly change day and night. The flying sword sometimes appeared in her hand, and sometimes it was used by her to attack the enemy from a distance. Sometimes the sword light was as fine as a crescent moon, and sometimes it was as round and flawless as a full moon. Xiao Morong had almost recovered more than 90% of her peak strength. The speed of her sword momentum was dazzling, and it seemed that the newcomer was completely suppressed. But it didn't take long for people to find that no matter how Xiao Morong changed, the golden sword defense did not budge. The long-haired woman in the middle of the sword defense, which was the image that Wang Lu now used to show people, almost yawned. Xiao Morong's face was red and she felt deeply ashamed. So she stopped the flashy sword momentum and began to concentrate her strength on one point. Faceless Moon was a spirit sword. If the difference in sword spirit was not taken into account, its grade was actually higher than that of the sword of Mount Kuan. Driven by Xiao Morong with all her strength, the body of the sword was flowing with the most refined and pure moonlight, as if it wanted to make the real moon feel ashamed. The next moment, just as the sword momentum was about to be fully charged, Xiao Morong suddenly broke out, trying to catch her opponent off guard. In her opinion, the reason that Wang Lu was able to keep his sword defense from being broken under the previous intensive offensive was more or less due to his prediction. So, as long as she could break the opponent's prediction, she could break the opponent's sword defense. Xiao Morong's sword moved up, ensuring that every bit of strength she had was squeezed into Faceless Moon. The spirit sword flew up in an instant and she also flew up in an instant. The opponent on the martial arts arena rapidly expanded in her field of vision, and she looked like she was still caught off guard. Victory seemed to be at her fingertips. Then Xiao Morong felt a tremendous force explode from the sword in her hand, then surged along her arm and spread all over her body. Her body, which had been tempered thousands of times during the King Pill realm, seemed extremely fragile under the pressure of the tremendous force. Her bones broke one by one, and her muscles were twisted into a ball. At the last moment before her consciousness disappeared, she vaguely saw her brain burst out. And the audience present was extremely shocked to see such a scene. Xiao Murong attacked with all her strength, and her momentum was like a rainbow. Then the spirit sword collided with the golden sword defense. With a muffled bang, the sword defense trembled slightly, but Xiao Murong turned into a mass of minced meat. Phew, it looks like I won. After putting away the sword of Mount Kuan, Wang Lu waved to the silent surroundings, and then walked down the martial arts arena under the increasingly solemn gaze of Moonless. When he stepped down from the arena, he clenched his fists, which was a small celebration. This was the first time that he combined the counterattack sword momentum of non-phase sword with primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi in actual combat. While rebounding the opponent's attack, he also added his own strength. Therefore, at that moment, Xiao Murong and the others simultaneously suffered a full blow from the peak of the King Pill realm, plus Wang Lu's heaven-splitting sword chi. Even if she had 10 yin and yang heart protection mirrors, she would not be able to save her life. And such an achievement could only be quickly condensed in a life-and-death battle. It was unknown how long it would take to truly perfect this move by relying on closed-door cultivation and primordial spirit deduction. Wang Lu looked up at the harem concubines who were watching the match from the contestants' seats, but what he saw was a mass of fat and plentiful experience points. Chapter 557. On the first day of the tournament, there were a total of 6 rounds of matches. 6 winners were decided, but at the same time, 6 corpses were left behind. The death rate of the losers reached an astonishing 100%, which was far beyond the expectations of many people. Before this, people thought that although the competition was a matter of life and death, everyone was sisters. Even if they had been fighting in the harem for so many years, there was still friendship between them, so they would not kill each other. But the reality was that the friendship in the harem could not be taken seriously at all. Those good sisters, who usually smiled on the surface, were more efficient than anyone else when it came to killing each other in the martial arts arena. Before the fight, the two would still talk about trivial matters and recall the good times they had spent together. They even agreed to taste the cooking of Moon Capital's chefs after the competition. But in the blink of an eye, the mask of goodwill was torn off, and the life of the other party was taken away in an unprecedented cruel way. Then, they looked at the corpse on the ground with a vengeful gaze and lamented how she deserved it. What's more, they exposed all kinds of dark secrets of the harem in public, as if they could finally vent out their pent-up frustrations for many years. The cruelty and indifference of these harem concubines shocked the bureaucrats under Moonless. Even Moonless herself frowned deeply, and her killing intent gradually condensed. She was deeply disappointed with the beauties in her harem, not disappointed with their ignorance of the general interest. In fact, for so many years, the principle of Moonless management of the harem was to let those cultivators, who used to be independent, become deaf and blind in the cramped harem cage, and eventually become ignorant. Not understanding the general interest was not actually wrong, but the mistake was that they could no longer please their master. Moonless sat on the high throne and watched the 6 matches with cold eyes. Except for the first match between Wang Lu and Xiao Murong, where the combination of non-phase Nameless Sword and Primal Chaos Sword Chi made her eyes light up, the remaining 5 matches seemed boring. With her vision as a deity stage Taoist master, the matches of several King Pill level were not worth mentioning at all. What she wanted was something else. She wanted to know how the concubines who had been kept as pets by her for decades would perform in the martial arts arena. She was looking forward to all kinds of complex human nature blooming on that vast but narrow stage. But in the end, all she saw was disappointment. The inexplicable hatred and the complaints of gratitude and grudges made her feel deeply bored. The competition on the second day was still the same. The concubines fought in the ugliest way possible. Under the test of life and death, they exposed their darkest side. On this day, the number of people in the auditorium had been reduced by half, and Moonless' face was covered with frost from beginning to end, causing the concubines in the martial arts arena to keep quiet out of fear. It was not until the beginning of the 5th match, when the girl named Luli stepped onto the stage, that Moonless showed a bit of interest. Luli had yet to pass the King Pill tribulation. Although everything was ready, right now she was still in peak shoot on stage, and her opponent was the right-hand woman of the main concubine Xiao Yun, the genius cultivator of the former Jade Cold Pool, Qi Qiangying. King Pill's cultivation level was at the peak, and she had a natal artifact that she had personally refined, the solidifying jade bottle. There were 3 rivers and 5 seas in the bottle, the accumulation of Qi Qiangying's 100 years of cultivation. In terms of fighting ability, Qi Qiangying could be ranked in the top 5 in the entire harem of Moon Capital. For Lu Li, drawing such an opponent seemed to be extremely disadvantageous. However, she looked very excited. There was not the slightest fear in her eyes, and the corner of her mouth was even slightly raised, revealing a clear smile. Qi Qiangying just sneered at this. During this period of time, she had heard people say that among the two newcomers, the taller one was shrewd and treacherous. Moreover, her strength was superior, far from being measured in terms of cultivation level. However, the more plump one was a pure fool. Apart from eating, she only giggled. Tisk, she's still giggling. Does she really think that she, a mere Shudan, is qualified to survive in the tournament? What a joke. Thinking of this, Qi Qiangying's heart gradually became hostile and murderous. She had no enmity with Lu Li, but in the previous 10 rounds of competition, the result of the 10 corpses had made her tacitly agree that the rule of this harem tournament was death. Moreover, from her point of view, it was perfectly justified to kill a baby-faced girl, a newcomer who was likely to threaten her harem status. Therefore, when the tournament officially began, she immediately turned the solidifying jade bottle, and the waves of the 3 rivers and 5 seas surged out from the mouth of the bottle. The momentum of the waves was not inferior to Han Yu's original magical ability. For a Shudan cultivator once caught in the flood, it would be a dead end. Lu Li's offense was strong, but her defense was weak. If she was really trapped in the endless flood, it would indeed be difficult for her to get out. However, the keen intuition given to her by Brilliant Sword Heart allowed her to intuit this from the beginning. When the mouth of Qi Qiangying's solidifying jade bottle had just tilted down, 12 flying swords flew out from Lu Li's sleeve and went straight to the mouth of the solidifying jade bottle, as if to destroy the mouth of the bottle with sharp sword momentum, so that the flood would be smothered in the bottle. Qi Qiangying inwardly praised her cleverness, and then inwardly laughed at her for being a fool. The cleverness was that the other party could see that the biggest problem of the solidifying jade bottle was the mouth of the bottle. The fool was that as the owner of the solidifying jade bottle, how could she not know this defect? The most vulnerable place had already been laid out by her with the most powerful trap, and the other party's flying swords were precisely the same as walking right into the trap. Although Lu Li's most powerful sword, the Skybreaker, was still in her hand, these 12 flying swords were obviously not ordinary. They must be her important magical treasure. Thus, she would first collect these 12 swords and then slowly deal with her. Qi Qiangying slightly withdrew her hand from the bottom of the bottle, and immediately, a powerful suction force gushed out from the mouth of the bottle. The 12 flying swords lost control in midair, cut off their connection with their master, and were shakily sucked into the bottle. Qi Qiangying smiled and felt the abundant spiritual power in the solidifying jade bottle. The next moment her smile froze. The energy in the bottle soared, and in a split second, it broke through the safety threshold of the solidifying jade bottle. She tried to release the seal on the mouth of the bottle, but it was too late. The solidifying jade bottle exploded in front of her eyes, and the water of the 3 rivers and 5 seas burst out, instantly drowning her. Qi Qiangying didn't even have the time to feel the pain of her palm being crushed, nor did she have the time to suppress the shattered jade mansion with her primordial spirit. She only felt that she was like a duckweed under a huge wave, and then in the torrential flood, a primal chaos sword light came at her face, taking away her last wisp of consciousness. Outside the training field, the main concubine Xiao Yun, suddenly got up and looked at the training field in disbelief. In her line of sight, Lu Li was stepping on the flying sword in her hand, avoiding the violent eruption of the flood. The training field of Moon Capital had been purified by a Taoist master of deity stage, so the space was very malleable. From the outside it seemed to be only 300 meters square, but the actual space inside could accommodate a mountain range. However, at this time most of it was submerged by the flood. Lu Li floated above the ocean, giggled, and then waved her slender hand. Suddenly, a simple and unadorned sword drilled out of the water and came to her side. It was Lu Li's Skybreaker. Concubine Xiao Yun immediately took a closer look and suddenly found out that the flying sword under Lu Li's foot was not Skybreaker, but just a gale sword. With the strength of Concubine Xiao Yun's Yuanying stage primordial spirit, she immediately began to recall every scene that she saw just now. Thus, she soon found out that just now, at the critical moment when Qi Qiangying released the 3 rivers water and collected the flying sword, Lu Li, with her Brilliant Sword Heart's magical ability, changed the position of Skybreaker in the gale sword. What a cunning little girl. Concubine Xiao Yun glared at her and gnashed her teeth. With Lu Li's peak Shudan stage strength, coupled with Brilliant Sword Heart's full control of Skybreaker, she could indeed bring great trouble to Qi Qiunying, and was even hopeful to seriously injure her. However, the jade condensation bottle was indeed worthy to be the magical treasure of a peak Taoist master of King Pil. Once the 3 rivers and 5 seas came out, Qi Qiunying could completely survive in the water and could not be killed. On the other hand, Lu Li couldn't stand the consumption of a protracted fight. In a full frontal confrontation, as long as her sword couldn't kill the opponent, Lu Li would be defeated without a doubt. In fact, before the fight, concubine Xiao Yun had told Qi Qiunying to use her advantage in cultivation base to deal with the opponent, so that she would have a 10% chance of winning. However, unexpectedly, the other party completely saw through their calculation and used an exceptionally treacherous little trick to directly kill Qi Qiunying, so that the opponent's magical ability could not be used. It was indeed a good calculation. If they fought with cultivation base, no matter how strong Skybreaker was, its power would still be limited by its master's strength. Qi Qiunying could completely deal with it, but Qi Qiunying accidentally fell into the trap and put her Skybreaker into the jade condensation bottle. The jade condensation bottle, which had barely reached the level of spiritual treasure and had yet to give birth to its spirit, actually had to contain the 3 rivers and 5 seas as well as an ancient immortal sword? Let alone in an unguarded situation? Qi Qiunying thought that the 12 flying swords that came in were magical treasure level, so the jade condensation bottle was more than enough. However, unexpectedly, there was actually an immortal sword hidden inside. How could the jade condensation bottle bear it? Naturally, it instantly burst. Whether it was concubine Xiao Yun or Qi Qiunying, they both thought that this would be a one-sided fight. Whether it was cultivation base or wisdom, Qi Qiunying was far above the opponent. However, unexpectedly, they correctly estimated the cultivation base but miscalculated the IQ. You hit it well, little girl. But the tournament has just begun, so we will meet again. Concubine Xiao Yun coldly said to Lu Li, I hope at that time, your little cleverness can still save your life. With that, concubine Xiao Yun turned around and left, not even saying goodbye to Moonless. Moderately presumptuous was her privilege as the Empress, but Moonless didn't care. Her eyes were still on Lu Li. Just now, that decisive sword strike had aroused her great interest, especially that Skybreaker. However, Lu Li didn't realize that her immortal sword had aroused the interest of a Taoist master of deity stage. She was still immersed in great joy. The girl turned her head to look at Wang Lu outside the arena and loudly shouted, Senior sister. Just now she praised me as smart. Lu Li is also praised as smart. Wang Lu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Smart? Perhaps. That last-minute sword strike was indeed smart, but it had nothing to do with IQ. What really played a role was Lu Li's intuition that was keener than a beast. Under the brilliant sword heart, the girl would not miss any opportunity. Even if she herself was unaware of that opportunity, her subconscious reaction would be to cut her throat. In fact, this was the real terrifying part of the brilliant sword heart. Compared to the all-conquering attack power, the key was the intuition that could bring this attack power to the limit. With such judgment, even if Lu Li was only in peak Shudan stage, she would still be able to succeed in every endeavor in this harem tournament. However, the real test was still behind. Judging from the reaction of Moonless, perhaps this farce of a harem tournament would not end well. It was time to consider when to withdraw. Chapter 558. Starting from the 3rd day of the tournament, the atmosphere finally cooled down. There were no more scenes of shrews fighting each other, and the casualty rate also plummeted. Both sides went all out, perfectly displaying the spirit of competition, and won the applause of the audience. As for Moonless, her expression was still indifferent, but it was no longer overcast, which made many people greatly relieved. However, Wang Lu knew that the calmer Moonless was, the less time was left for him. As the organizer of the tournament, so far, all the situations were in his plan, including the bloody and violent scene of the previous 2 days, as well as Moonless' initial anger, were all in his careful plan. However, now the situation had gradually begun to get out of his control. The purpose of Wang Lu's tournament was straightforward: to borrow Moonless harem members to give himself some experience, and then wait for the opportunity to run away. Although these harem members lacked actual combat experience, and they had been fighting in the harem for many years, most of them were, after all, monks of the Temple of Heaven. Their basic skills were quite solid, and their magical treasures and props were also endless. Even if such an opponent was not a strong enemy, it was also not a weakling. However, there must be a suitable excuse to brush other people's harem. No matter how ruthless Moonless was to her harem, she would not let others slaughter her. Therefore Wang Lu designed a life and death tournament. At the same time, in order to guide Moonless' mood, he also deliberately designed the scene of the previous 2 days. On the surface, he designed the tournament to determine the opponent by drawing lots, but through under-the-table manipulation he arranged the people who had grudges against each other as his opponents. Especially in the first few groups, their hatred was absolutely irreconcilable. Then, as the contestant in the first group, he crushed his opponent into minced meat in an extremely ruthless way, which directly brought the bloody atmosphere to the arena. Then, even if it was inertia, it would make the contestants behind him kill each other. This kind of inferior fighting scene was deliberately done by Wang Lu, and as expected, Moonless was deeply dissatisfied with it. Thus, in the midst of Moonless' dissatisfaction, the 2 fights between Wang Lu and Lu Li stood out and decisively won the interest of Moonless. Wang Lu's original intention was to let Moonless' interest support her to continue to watch, and as long as Moonless was interested in the fight between Wang Lu and Lu Li, they could safely continue to fight in the arena until the harem concubines were either killed or injured. At that time, Wang Lu and Lu Li, who had gained enough experience, could also prepare to withdraw. But now this step had to be brought forward. His and Lu Li's performance did arouse the interest of Moonless, but Moonless' interest was obviously beyond expectation. Especially when she looked at the immortal sword Skybreaker, the greed in her eyes became more and more obvious. Wang Lu knew that he seemed to have underestimated the greed of Moonless as a vassal king. He thought that with the previous sword strike that he and Lu Li launched together, with his own non-phase method and primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi, he could create a great enough backing to make Moonless hesitate to take action. However, unexpectedly, the King of Palace of Heaven was already on the verge of being blinded by greed. Aside from being a political figure, Moonless was also a cultivator, a powerful cultivator that could be counted on one's fingers in the heavenly earth. Although she was not a sword cultivator in the strict sense, the Skybreaker had a supreme attraction to any cultivator. Wang Lu believed that when she witnessed Lu Li defeating Qi Qiangying with the power of the Skybreaker, the greed in her heart became more and more uncontrollable. That being the case, Wang Lu had to speed up the process. On the one hand, he revised the match list so that the viewing value of the tournament skyrocketed, in an attempt to distract Moonless' attention. On the other hand, "Thank you for letting me win." Wang Lu cupped his hands toward the woman who knelt on one knee in front of him and then floated down the arena. With Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting Sword Chi as the main attack and non-phase sword defense as the main defense, Wang Lu used 113 moves to defeat a low-level Yuanying stage concubine. And in order to win, the other party even burned a lot of her innate vitality. This fight could be called the most wonderful fight since the beginning of the tournament. Wang Lu fought a Yuanying stage cultivator with the King Pill. Although the process was more daunting than dangerous, it was not easy. Therefore, the harvest was unprecedentedly rich. He clearly felt that his primordial spirit was more condensed, his jade mansion more stable, and the King Pill shone brightly with vitality. Just this fight alone was better than a month of closed-door training. However, the problem was that, according to this momentum, Wang Lu's next opponent would be the main concubine Xiao Yun. This was, of course, the result of the black box operation. Otherwise, concubine Xiao Yun should have met Lu Li in the next round. However, Wang Lu forced her to be in front of him. Concubine Xiao Yun, of course, also guessed that Wang Lu was behind this operation, but she didn't care. Whether it was Wang Lu or Lu Li, in her opinion, it was all the same. The two of them were in the same group, so whoever they taught a lesson to was the same. And no matter who it was, she had enough confidence that she could win. Concubine Xiao Yun was different from the other concubines in the harem. She was Moonless' legal spouse, no doubt the mistress of the harem. She was of noble birth, and her strength was far more powerful than her peers. Even Moonless himself was not her opponent in the same stage. Moonless opening a harem in Moon Capital was also the result of concubine Xiao Yun's acquiescence. If not, even with Moonless' overbearing attitude, he wouldn't be able to open a harem. Concubine Xiao Yun has seen the strength of Wang Lu and Lu Li very clearly. If they were in the same stage, she was far from their opponent. However, she was now a middle-level Yuanying stage cultivator, with more than 100 years of cultivation, and full of magical treasures. Even the martial arts arena in Moon Capital was personally built by her. The time, place and people were all on her side, so what if Wang Lu was strong? In view of this, please allow me to go out and purchase some props and equipment for combat preparation. In the inner hall of Moon Capital, Wang Lu submitted an application to Moonless to go out. Moonless was lying on the throne of Moon Capital. The red eye of the skull face carefully looked at Wang Lu and then sneered. What a lame reason. Do you think I will give you the opportunity to escape? Wang Lu avoided Moonless' question and insisted on his own opinion. Although the inventory in Moon Capital is rich, the props that I need are not here. Moonless sneered. What do you need? Just give me the list and I will have someone to purchase it for you. In the Palace of Heaven, there is nothing that I can't buy. Wang Lu said, the authority of Moonless Harmonious Heaven is supreme in the Palace of Heaven, and I have a deep understanding of this. However, the Palace of Heaven is not just your own Palace of Heaven. As the Empress, concubine Xiao Yun's authority is second only to you. I'm worried that my list would fall into her hands not long after it is sent out. If so, my card would be exposed to concubine Xiao Yun in advance, which would be too disadvantageous for me. Oh, you have a sharp tongue. Moonless still sneered. Then try to overcome the disadvantageous conditions to fight. You are a sword cultivator, so you should have the willpower to overcome all difficulties. Wang Lu said, so I am now trying to overcome your obstruction and fight for a chance to win for myself. I know that you are worried that I will run away, so I will leave a hostage in Moon Capital. My junior sister Lu Li will stay here. If I don't return, she will be at your disposal. What a joke. Aren't the two of you at my disposal now? Wang Lu still avoided the threat of Moonless and continued his own topic. Moreover, if I can win, it will also be a great advantage for you, won't it? Moon Capital doesn't need two masters, and the harem doesn't need an empress with weak authority. Unfortunately, there are some things that are not easy for you to do, but in the arena of life and death, everything is possible. All you have to do is to give me a chance. Moonless suddenly opened his right eye. Very well, then I will give you a chance. But if you don't do what you promised, Wang Lu said with a smile, it's easy for you to take my life. After Wang Lu walked out of Moon Capital, he went straight to the barren mountain on the border. The secret agent of Palace of Heaven who followed behind him only followed for a short distance before he disappeared without a trace. When he wanted to follow again, he was blocked by two primal chaos heaven-splitting sword cheese that came from nowhere. In desperation, the secret agent of Palace of Heaven had to turn back and pray that he would not be slapped to death by the angry Lady Harmonious Heaven. After returning to Moon Capital, the secret agent was not killed by Moonless. After listening to the report, she remained silent and then left the throne in a flash and came to a bedroom in the harem. A girl as clear as jade and as elegant as a sword sat on the futon, closed her eyes and meditated, cultivating her spirit and nourishing her sword. She placed the skybreaker on her chest, forming a mysterious channel between her and the sword. What a brilliant sword heart, what a great immortal sword skybreaker. Seeing this scene, Moonless could not help but feel a little envious. If she could have such a qualification, such an immortal sword, perhaps she would no longer be the presenter. The vassal king of Harmonious Heaven sounded awe-inspiring, but compared with those who truly walked on the top of the immortal path, what did she have? However, while Moonless was in a trance, the girl in front of her had become erratic and vaguely illusory. Moonless instantly reacted. What was left in the bedroom was just a brilliant illusion. Once a deity stage cultivator approached it, the illusion would be difficult to maintain. As for the real person, no one knew how far she had run away. Moonless' anger suddenly erupted. What a bold girl. The next moment, the left hand of the white bone stretched out, and the power of death shrouded her. The bedroom seemed to be filled with the wailing of millions of wronged souls. And Lu Li's figure broke and disappeared without a trace. There was only the immortal sword skybreaker floating in midair. Feeling the approaching power of death, the immortal sword issued a sharp buzzing sound, which in a split second, squeezed out the elegy of the wronged souls, causing Moonless to feel the turbulence in her jade mansion. What a great immortal sword. Even without a master, it could shake a Taoist master of deity stage with its own power alone. However, it was, after all, an ownerless object. Moonless retracted her left hand and stretched out her right hand, which symbolized life, and directly touched the hilt of the skybreaker. Immediately, the sword transmitted a countershock force. However, the sharp turn of life and death weakened the countershock force a lot. Moonless focused her mind and quickly suppressed the skybreaker. Then, looking at the empty bedroom, a trace of amusement welled up in her heart. Two little guys, using an immortal sword to play the cicada shedding its carapace? How audacious, sharp, and decisive. Were it not for the immortal sword, as the master of Moon Capital, how could Moonless not notice that Lu Li's aura had disappeared from Moon Capital? Even the way she escaped could be guessed by Moonless. It must be that when Wang Lu left, he took away her skybreaker, and then Lu Li used the method of person and sword exchange to put the skybreaker in Moon Capital, and then her real body escaped. However, Leaving behind the Skybreaker was not a loss. It was just that, why did she always feel that she missed a trick? However, just as Moonless intended to further explore the Skybreaker, the sword in her hand suddenly swayed. The quaint sword disappeared and was replaced by a flaming flying sword. Moonless was stunned for a moment, and then she angrily crushed the flaming sword with her left hand made of white bone. Luli could not only exchange the person and the sword, but she could also freely exchange the position of different flying swords. Just a day ago she used this trick to trick Qi Qiangying into putting the Skybreaker into the solidifying jade bottle, which led to the tragedy. And now she used this trick to exchange the civet cat for the crown prince. You two have done a good job. Moonless softly said to herself. Her voice was trembling, her body was trembling, the whole moon was trembling, and so was the palace of heaven. Within 3 days I will take the lives of the two of you. The determination of a Taoist master of deity stage turned into a thunderbolt from the blue sky. Chapter 559. That was so dangerous I was almost struck by lightning. Outside the palace of heaven, Wang Lu looked at the bottomless rift behind him with lingering fear. A deity stage cultivator was indeed awesome. Separated by such a long distance, a thunderbolt from the clear sky was powerful enough to turn a king pill-level cultivator into ashes. Fortunately, just now he and Luli did not stand under that thunderbolt. Instead, through a substitute sword, they guided the power of the thunderbolt down and completely poured it into the ground. Looking at the deep rift that was split open by the power of the thunderbolt and smelling the pungent burnt smell in the air, Wang Lu could not help but sigh that even though his cultivation base was far inferior to hers in terms of IQ, he could completely suppress Moonless. Thus, he could guess her every step of reaction in advance and then make arrangements in advance. Through the magical ability of Lu Li's human and sword exchange, Wang Lu successfully helped her escape from Moon Capital. However, immediately after that, they would have to face the full pursuit of a Taoist master of deity stage. Wang Lu didn't think that the time that he had bought would allow the two of them to escape far enough. Therefore, in Moon Capital, Wang Lu simply left some clues for Moonless to actively guide her next move. Lu Li's human and sword exchange was not a flawless escape skill. The reason why she could freely exchange position between human and sword, and even hide from the perception of Moonless as well as the strict monitoring network of Moon Capital, was that Lu Li's brilliant sword heart had refined the flying sword into a part of the cultivator's body. The human and sword exchange was as natural as raising a hand or a foot, and it would not cause any excess magical power fluctuation. However, the flaw was that the connection between the human and sword was too close. Once this point was caught, it could be traced back to her. Secondly, if one wanted to leave an illusion of Lu Li in Moon Capital, in order to delay the time as much as possible, it was necessary to leave a powerful enough immortal sword. Considering the distance and other factors, only Skybreaker could take on this heavy responsibility. However, to leave an immortal sword in Moon Capital, the loss was too heavy. Moreover, the Skybreaker had long been an inseparable part of Lu Li. Once it was taken away, at least half of Lu Li's cultivation base would be wasted. Therefore, when the illusion was broken, Lu Li had to immediately swap the two flying swords, replacing the one that was the least involved with the other. However, in front of Moonless, no matter how mysterious this magical ability was, she would still be able to catch some clues. With Moonless temper, she would definitely take action in anger, and with the ability of a deity stage cultivator, taking the enemy's head from thousands of miles away was as easy as flipping one's hand. Therefore, Wang Lu told Lu Li to prepare the substitute sword in advance, so that at the critical moment, she could sacrifice a flying sword in exchange for her own life. The result was as expected. After changing back the Skybreaker, a bolt of lightning fell from the clear sky. Were it not for Wang Lu's early preparation and promptly escaping with Lu Li, the two of them would have been seriously injured by this bolt of lightning. After this lightning strike, presumably, Moonless herself would be even more annoyed, because her original intention was not to kill the two of them with the lightning strike, but to seriously injure them. Then she would personally come along with the lightning strike to capture the two of them and bring them back to Moon Capital to inflict eternal torture on them. However, the result was that Wang Lu and Lu Li were not hurt by the lightning strike. Moonless lightning strike only smashed Lu Li's flying sword, but failed to leave any mark on the two of them. Right now, Moonless could at most carry out a carpet search through the location of the lightning strike, but it was impossible to specifically search for people. Because Wang Lu and Lu Li had left the boundary of the Palace of Heaven and entered the scope of Sky City. Moonless had great authority in the Palace of Heaven, but it could not be substituted in Sky City. This central city of heavenly earth carried the highest authority of the Temple of Heaven. Among the 9 heavens, Qingtian was at the top, while Xintian and the other 5 lived in Sky City. There were at least dozens of vassal lords like Moonless in Sky City, and Moonless was definitely not the most outstanding among them. Therefore Wang Lu did not worry that after entering Sky City, Moonless would have the ability to wantonly search for him and Lu Li. After all, Moonless' status as a vassal lord was too special. Not to mention that she was just a harmonious heaven stage. Even if she was promoted by 1 stage, it was impossible for her to act recklessly in Sky City. Once it attracted the attention of Qingtian, Moonless' throne as a vassal lord would be removed in minutes. So, for the time being we are safe. Lu Li, during this period of time I will help you heal, and then, let's go through the King Pill tribulation together. Lu Li nodded with a pale face. The girl's face was often full of smile, but at this time, it was replaced by a depressed look. He saw that Lu Li's eyes were without light and her lips were pale. Obviously her spirit was injured. This was also the price of escape. Even after so many preparations, in the end, the 2 of them still paid a considerable price. The flying sword that Lu Li refined into her body was crushed by Moonless and struck by lightning. For her, it was no less than having her 2 arms cut off. Although she was prepared, the injury was still not light. More importantly, Lu Li was now in the last period of core nourishing stage before the King Pill tribulation. Although the loss of these 2 flying swords was still within the bearable range, it greatly shook her jade mansion, causing the highly condensed Shudan to show irregular tremor. The King Pill tribulation might not be suppressed anymore. In order to achieve the King Pill tribulation, Lu Li's early preparation was very adequate. Whether it was the level of method, magical power reserve, or state of mind, all of them could be said to be perfect. As long as the opportunity came, she could achieve a perfect breakthrough in one fell swoop. However, such a deep accumulation had actually somewhat gone beyond common sense. If it were someone else, with half of Lu Li's accumulation, it would be impossible for them not to break through. The reason why Lu Li was able to suppress her stage to the present was thanks to her special physique of brilliant sword heart. However, in Moon Capital, the successive battles allowed her to gain rich experience, and then she was continuously shaken by Moonless. Finally, she was somewhat unable to suppress it anymore. With the girl's qualification, there was no bottleneck in achieving the King Pill. If she wanted to achieve it, she could do it at any time. However, at this time she was seriously injured. If she achieved the King Pill in this situation, then the King Pill would be incomplete, and her previous hard work would be in vain. Therefore, Wang Lu must take Lu Li into the city as soon as possible to heal her injury. Healing in the wilderness was simply courting death. Even if Moonless didn't dare to act rashly in the Sky City, it was easy to secretly capture 2 King Pill level cultivators in the outskirts. The process of entering the city was smoother than expected. After paying the basic entrance fee and showing the token obtained from the Temple of Gorgeous Town, Wang Lu took Lu Li into the central city of the heavenly earth, which was exactly the same as the last time Wang Lu came alone. It seemed that Moonless didn't infiltrate her forces into the Sky City, which was barely good news. Of course, it was also possible that after Moonless calmed down, she let her people secretly monitor the Sky City, and when the preparation was complete, she would strike like thunder. However, Wang Lu couldn't care less. After entering the Sky City, Wang Lu soon found a high-priced training room for rent. The inside was rich in spiritual energy and had a complete set of medicinal pills, although only relatively speaking. Compared to the training room on the brilliant peak of Spirit Sword Mountain, this place was far inferior, but it could barely meet the needs of Lu Li. Moreover, Wang Lu had no room to be picky. In the next 3 days, Wang Lu tried his best to help Lu Li suppress the King Pill and treat her injury. Although he didn't deliberately cultivate the healing immortal method, in any case he still had the cultivation base of the middle-level King Pill, so he quickly helped Lu Li stabilize. A few days later, Lu Li began to cross the King Pill. The process was orderly and soon on the right track. It was estimated that in 10 days she would be able to perfect the pill. This King Pill was not easy to achieve. Once the pill was formed, its quality would probably be unprecedented, comparable to Wang Lu's King Pill that condensed 2 great immortal-level methods. Wang Lu was quite looking forward to this. However, during the condensing of the King Pill, Wang Lu couldn't stay in the training room, so as not to disturb the other party with his own power. Therefore Wang Lu stood guard outside the door. His non-phase sword defense propped up a faint curtain of light, which excluded all possible interference. On the 3rd day, Lu Li has reached the final step of condensing her golden core. A perfectly round golden core has been formed in her jade mansion. She only needed to perfectly combine it with her body and primordial spirit, and then it would be a success. Wang Lu had been maintaining his non-phase sword defense outside the training room for 3 days and 3 nights, so he was slightly tired. However, thinking that Lu Li was about to condense the pill, his faint excitement made the tiredness not worth mentioning. As the saying goes, the closer one gets to the last step, the more careful one must be in all aspects. If something went wrong in the final stage of the King Pill fusion, it would be too late for regrets. Thinking to this, Wang Lu took a deep breath and supported his non-phase sword defense a bit more firmly. In this way, after no one knows how long, he suddenly felt 2 scorching eyes coming from a distance. Wang Lu immediately turned his head, but he only saw a row of snow-white walls. The training room he rented was in a secluded corner on the outskirts of Sky City. Most of the surrounding buildings were empty. They were tall and mighty, but no one lived there. This was a typical planning error of Sky City. However, it was safer to use this place as the place for Lu Li to condense the pill. In the past few days he had lit up the sword light of his non-phase sword defense day and night, but no one noticed it. However, unexpectedly at the critical time, it attracted other people's attention. Wang Lu focused his eyes. His eyes penetrated through the layers of buildings and saw that a few miles away, a woman in a splendid dress was looking at him with surprise and joy. Her eyes also penetrated through the layers of obstacles. The woman looked elegant and generous. Her eyebrows were raised, showing a bit of heroic and forthright spirit. Wang Lu felt that she was quite familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her. And at this time, the woman's figure flashed and directly crossed several miles and appeared in front of Wang Lu. The speed of her figure greatly surprised Wang Lu, but what surprised him even more was what followed. "I can't believe you're here." As soon as the woman opened her mouth, all the hair on Wang Lu's body stood up. Because this voice couldn't be more familiar. Just a few days ago the owner of this voice was the enemy that he focused on. It was the master of Palace of Heaven, moonless harmonious sky. In an instant Wang Lu didn't have time to think too much. He didn't have time to think about why Moonless would appear here at this time, why the half-skeleton half-beauty would suddenly restore the left half of her body, and why she dared to find trouble with him in Sky City at this time. In a flash, a moment of delay was enough to be fatal. Wang Lu immediately channeled his primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi, ready to erupt his full power. Although in front of a Taoist master of deity stage, such power was probably insignificant, he had to buy time for Lu Li. However, Moonless' action was far faster than him. The speed of a Taoist master of deity stage was too fast, even faster than Wang Lu's thought. While the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi was still brewing in the King Pill, Moonless had already rushed over, and then with a few words she shocked Wang Lu so much that he forgot to resist. "Sister Wu, I missed you so much." Chapter 560. Sister Wu? The familiar address and the familiar tone made Wang Lu, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, feel a chill run down his spine. But at the same time he forced himself to calm down. His face remained expressionless, and his heartbeat and muscle reactions were perfectly controlled. No matter how much information was contained in the word Sister Wu, now was not a good time to process it. Moonless was right in front of him, and he had to at least get through this hurdle first before considering other things. Right now, Moonless was smiling like a flower in his bosom. Her face, brimming with enthusiasm, was overflowing with happiness. It was hard to imagine that just 10 days ago, this was still a horrifying face that was half alive and half dead. Countless people would tremble with fear because of a slight tremble of her eyebrows. But Wang Lu did not dare to be careless, because since she could turn from a living dead into a beautiful girl in a few days, it was hard to guarantee that she would revert to her old ways in the blink of an eye. Now she was calling him Sister Wu affectionately, but in the next moment she might turn the other party into ashes with a cold snort. Therefore Wang Lu had to deal with every reaction not only for himself, but also for the girl who was crossing the tribulation in the room behind him. However, in the face of a sudden hug, what kind of reaction could be regarded as the right one? Was Moonless throwing herself into his arms showing her true feelings, or was it a realistic disguise? After all, this was Sky City, and if she acted too presumptuously she might not be able to bear the consequences. There were too many unknowns, making it difficult for him to decide. Should he smile and hug Moonless, or coldly refuse, or simply take out the sword of Mount Kuan and fight to the death? Every choice seemed to be somewhat reasonable, but there were also great hidden dangers. In a flash, Wang Lu made a balance in his heart and decided to deal with it in the middle. So he made a response that could be called omnipotent. Hee. Neither salty nor weak, neither servile nor overbearing. No matter how many changes you make, I will just hee. It was not a delicate response, but it was a supreme weapon to delay time and lead the conversation to the next stage. Sure enough, Moonless didn't care too much after listening. Instead, she rubbed against Wang Lu's arms like a spoiled child and made a lazy nasal sound. Wang Lu broke out in a cold sweat again. Right now he was wearing the appearance of his master, Wang Wu, by relying on a wonderful illusion technique. Although the illusion technique was exquisite and could perfectly simulate the sense of touch, so the sense of touch that Moonless was experiencing must be very good. It was, after all, an illusion technique. With a Taoist master of deity transformation at such a close distance, Wang Lu really did not have the confidence that he would not be seen through by the other party. Fortunately, Moonless really didn't seem to have any wariness towards her. After dawdling for a while, she raised her head and said, "Sister Wu, I'll come find you again tonight, okay?" Wang Lu muttered to himself, not in a hurry to answer. In fact, he really wanted to nod his head and say, "No problem. You can come tonight. I'll leave this afternoon." But if he answered too eagerly, he might reveal a flaw, so he had to keep her in suspense. Sure enough, as soon as he muttered, it was Moonless' turn to be anxious. She hugged Wang Lu's arm and shook it back and forth. "How about tonight? It's rare for me to come to Tsangtian City." Wang Lu didn't even have time to savor the touch coming from his arm. All his mind was used to analyze the next countermeasures. Judging from the current dialogue, the strength and weakness between Moonless and Sister Wu, or the contrast between the offensive and the defensive, was clear at a glance. That majestic vassal lord of Chaotian Palace had been trained by Sister Wu into a weak and vulnerable appearance, so he had a lot of room for mediation at this time. As long as he didn't reveal any obvious flaws, the initiative was in his hands. Tonight? Wang Lu deliberately frowned, and then, under the eager eyes of Moonless, he slowly nodded. "Maybe I can. I have something to do right now, so you go back first. If I have time in the evening, I will look for you." Then, facing the pleasantly surprised look of Moonless, Wang Lu revealed a smile and then waved his finger, making a vague gesture of telepathic finger. Moonless let out a soft "ah," looking as if she was about to faint from happiness. Her face was flushed and her eyes were filled with tears. I'm so happy." With that said, she covered her face and said in a sacrificial voice, "You wanted me to give up the Deathine body and made the cultivation I've cultivated for dozens of years go down the drain. But you gave me double the happiness. Thank you, Sister Wu." After that, she turned around and left. "Sister Wu, I came to Tsangtian City this time to attend a temporary meeting. I'll be in Chaotian Guild Hall these days, waiting for you." And at the last moment before she left, her eyes were still locked on Wang Lu's outstretched finger, reluctant to part. When Moonless' figure flickered and disappeared, Wang Lu just wanted to stick two fingers into his own eyes. This play was really too beautiful that no one dared to watch. To be honest, the scene of a young girl yearning for love was actually quite pleasing to the eye, especially when the one in love was a beautiful girl with outstanding appearance. But as long as one remembered that not long ago she was half alive and half dead, and half of her face was white, no matter how beautiful her appearance was, it would be greatly reduced. What's more, the other party was a vicious and merciless deity stage vassal lord. Compared to the innocent girl, life and death, yin and yang, they were the opposite. Of course, what made people want to poke their own eyes even more was the way she called him Sister Wu. The world was so big and there might be thousands of Sister Wu, but there was probably only one Sister Wu who could make a deity stage vassal lord change the world in just a few days. Even Wang Lu himself, at this time, sincerely felt admiration for Sister Wu's remarkable ability. "Dear Sister Wu, in the face of such a person, how could you do it? Is the telepathic finger completely not screening the target? Even the living dead, your taste has already broken through the core of the earth. And what are you planning to do with such a skill? Seduce a rich woman to subsidize your family? TSK, no wonder Hua Yun has the best relationship with you among the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall. It seems that your sisterhood is really deep. As for Ao Guanhai, who also has a good relationship with you, I'm afraid it's just a kind of mutual appreciation between people with great tools. Alas, Sister Wu, when your brother Ouyang Shang gave you all his inheritance, including his magical wisdom and perception, it was not for you to invent these strange and obscene skills. Moreover, when I wanted you to live happily, I didn't want that innocent girl who was infinitely devout to the immortal path to become like this, using her enthusiasm to develop skills to make people happy. It was just that, thinking to this, Wang Lu could not help but feel a pain in the ass. Sister Wu. Alas, I can't believe I can meet my dear sister Wu in this kind of place. How King elusive are you? What are you doing here instead of idling around in the Spirit Sword Mountain? No matter how I look at you, you don't look like the kind of person who is diligent in the instance. What was even more strange was that the group of old guys in Heavenly Sword Hall actually dared to let her out. Moreover, they even let her go to the Fengdu Immortal Tombs. Weren't they afraid that she would do something that would bring shame to the Lingjian school for 100 years under the eyes of the Wanxian League? For a time Wang Lu's thoughts were in a mess. However, after thinking for a while, he could only secretly sigh. To put it bluntly, he was still panicking because he was not ready to meet Wang Wu again. He intended to calm his mind through a period of actual combat training, and then find a suitable opportunity to meet Wang Wu in a suitable way. Of course, what was the appropriate standard? That was yet to be determined. In any case, now was definitely not the right time. Unfortunately, regardless of whether Wang Lu was suitable or not, Sister Wu was already approaching. Moreover, it was likely that she had already learned of his existence and might appear in front of him at any time. He walked in the heavenly earth with the face of Wang Wu. Thus, when he also entered the heavenly earth and encountered Moonless, Wang Wu would inevitably realize that someone was acting in her name, considering that the existence of Lu Li had also been exposed. Thus, a simple inference: who would walk in the appearance of Wang Wu and be followed by Lu Li? The answer was clear at a glance. Thinking of this, Wang Lu could not help but feel a bit impatient. Even a few days ago, when he had just entered Sky City with Lu Li, the situation had not yet stabilized, and he might be chased by Moonless at any time. He did not feel so uneasy. Little Lu Li, hurry up and reach the core formation stage. After that, let's go, the further the better. With his back to the training room, Wang Lu softly sighed. However, the next moment, a sneer came from behind him. Go. Where are you going, little Wang Lu? Wang Lu's body instantly froze. Even when Moonless threw herself into his arms with the face of a young girl in love, he did not feel so shocked. However, Wang Lu was indeed Wang Lu. He possessed one of the best mental state among the King Pill cultivators. Without any instruction, his non-phase immortal heart madly operated and controlled all the emotional fluctuations of Wang Lu. Calm, he must be highly calm. The strength of that person was far stronger than him, and now that person appeared behind him like a ghost. It could be said that he had the upper hand. In this case, if he wanted to escape, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. Most of his skills came from her teaching. Thinking of the rich inheritance that she inherited, as well as the 150 years of long cultivation time, Wang Lu did not feel that with his current middle-level King Pill cultivation base, he was qualified to compete head-on with the famous number 1 King Pill in 9 regions. Therefore, the only way to win was to take an unconventional approach, and it must be the kind of unconventional approach that could make the opponent feel shaken. In a flash, Wang Lu had thought a lot and made his own response in the first instance. He turned around with a smile on his face, and directly threw himself into the arms of the person behind him. Sister Wu, I miss you so much. Then, in the moment when Sister Wu was stunned, Wang Lu lifted his foot and kicked, trying to escape by using the counterforce. This kick even contained primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Let alone wanting to kill you, it was more like wanting you to die. Chapter 561. Sister Wu, King missed you so much. Wang Lu said as he kicked. This kick was fast and ruthless. Combined with the power of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi, it was no less than the full power attack of a middle-grade King Pill cultivator. Even if it was a peak King Pill cultivator, under a hurry, only half of them could steadily withstand it. However, Wang Lu believed that with Sister Wu's strength, it was absolutely easy for her to withstand this ending descendant's kick with her eyes closed. Therefore, the key question was whether he could take the opportunity to escape. When it came to escape, Wang Lu was not good at it. His speed was mediocre, and he was not proficient in concealment spell. Relying on the countershock force alone to escape from the 9 regions number 1 King Pill was tantamount to a fantasy. Therefore, after Wang Lu kicked, he quickly sent a message through his primordial spirit to disturb the enemy. Little Lu Li is having a difficult labor in the house. I'll go find hot water, you protect her. In general, when a normal person received such a message, they would inevitably fall into a great shock, so that they would not be able to make an effective response in a short period of time. Moreover, Wang Lu was deeply aware of Sister Wu's deep bottom line, so when his primordial spirit transmitted the message, he also attached a considerable impact force. If it was against other people, this was simply a 2-pronged, deadly killing move. However, Wang Lu knew that even if his attack power doubled, he might not be able to hurt her. He could only hope that she would be unable to react in a hurry, leaving him a little opportunity. As a result, in the next moment, Wang Lu saw the power of the 9 regions #1 King Pill. The primordial spirit attack was like a stone sinking into the sea, silent, as if the target of the attack was a stone rather than a living person. The ending descendant's kick was blocked by an invisible wall of air. The wall of air with absolute defensive power coldly scattered Wang Lu's primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Therefore, the bones of the 5 toes were instantly broken under the impact. Of course, Wang Lu also borrowed the counter-shock force, but before he had time to combine this force with the forward force of his sword of Mount Kuan, he felt that his shoulder was lightly tapped. In a split second, the magic power that filled his entire body collapsed with a loud bang, no longer listening to his commands. The illusion that could hide from Moonless was also broken. His body, which had been tempered hundreds and thousands of times, became extremely weak, causing Wang Lu to fall down involuntarily. Everything seemed to be irreversible. However, as a non-phase cultivator, his unyielding spirit had already penetrated deep into his bone marrow. Therefore, at the moment when he was about to hit the ground, Wang Lu revolved the already solidified King Pill, squeezing out a trace of magical power from it. Although it was just a trace of magic power, it was enough for enlightened King Pill to cast a simple spell. Wang Lu's figure suddenly fell down, directly merging with the ground. The tidy stone floor was as soft as water, and he forced his way in. This was the earth escape technique that commanded the earth. Wang Lu's response was extremely fast. After sinking into the ground, he quickly sorted out his magical power and further controlled the earth escape technique, trying to move as fast as possible in the earth. He had experienced 2 trips across the 3,000 worlds, so he was no longer a person blessed by the 9 regions. However, the earth escape technique was like a magical seed which took root and germinated in his jade mansion. He was confident that his attainment in the earth escape technique was stronger than the vast majority of cultivators with earth heavenly spirit root. As long as he was given a breath of time, he could escape dozens of miles away. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to get this breath of time. The moment he sank into the ground, the earth trembled and cracked. A large amount of soil and gravel were shaken into the sky, and the surrounding spiritual energy became wild and disorderly. Wang Lu's jade mansion suffered a violent impact, and the trace of magical power that he managed to condense with great difficulty flowed away. Once again he felt an unprecedented sense of emptiness and powerlessness, and with a plop, he fell into the pit. This time he really couldn't escape. Wang Lu had no choice but to turn over and face the person that he didn't want to face no matter what. "Yo, long time no see." He waved his hand and greeted her. "Humph, long time no see indeed." Wang Wu snorted, with a smile yet not a smile on her face. Her eyes flickered, which made Wang Lu feel a pain in the ass. In theory, this fellow should not know anything, but Wang Lu always felt that after coming back this time, it was likely that she would see something. 150 years ago, Wang Wu was an introverted and slow girl. However, in the Great War of the Fallen Immortals, she inherited the legacy left by the most astute and wise person at that time. In any case, Wang Lu felt that if it were him, he would have already seen that there was something wrong with him. Even if he didn't see it, he could pretend to have a problem and then blackmail her. So, what should I do? In a flash, Wang Lu's mind turned hundreds of thoughts, but he couldn't think of any way. Finally, he decided to pretend to be stupid first, and then act according to the circumstances. After looking at him for a few seconds, Wang Wu sneered, took out something from her mustard seed bag and threw it over. It was a hot kettle. "The hot water you want?" Wang Lu directly threw away the hot kettle, thought for a moment and then said, "The temperature is not right." As a result, Wang Wu directly jumped into the pit, slapped him on the head, and then pulled Wang Lu's collar to pull him up. "The temperature is not right? You traitorous disciple want to rebel, don't you? After a few months of not seeing each other, your cultivation base has risen a lot, so you don't put me, the #1 king pill in 9 regions, in your eyes, do you? Do you think that just because I borrow some money from you, you can be above me? Let me tell you, money is not everything." After hearing this and looking at Wang Wu's righteous expression, Wang Lu suddenly felt that the dark cloud that had been troubling his mind had dissipated. The hesitation and uncertainty about the reunion was, in fact, completely unnecessary. Although it was still a bit difficult to really prepare to face everything in the past and present, it was not necessary to run away before facing it. In short, it was better to leave everything as it was. Compared with the relationship between his big brother and his junior sister, It seemed that this scene made him feel more like a fish in water. Therefore, after a slight sigh, Wang Lu tidied up his red and white robe, and then said to Wang Wu, "Since money is so useless, I don't want to insult you with useless things anymore." Upon hearing this, Wang Wu gawked and seemed a bit nervous. Then she continued to speak righteously, "If I don't go to hell, who will go to hell? Please insult me." "In short, why are you here?" Wang Lu asked. "Are you looking for me?" Seeing that Wang Lu no longer mentioned money, Wang Wu breathed a sigh of relief and then said, "Who has the leisure time to care about you? I came here at the request of the sect to explore the immortal dreamland. Senior brother sect leader told me that there is no one in the entire 9 regions who is more suitable than me to enter the immortal dreamland that only beautiful women can enter." Wang Lu thought for a moment and said, "I believe that uncle wants to emphasize that the key point is the king pill stage and below. In short, don't worry, I'm not here for you and no one will come for you." Upon hearing this, Wang Lu felt awkward. Not to mention anything else, the lead disciple of one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League ran away from home. Didn't it cause any shock? Although the decision to run away from home was made by him, the sect actually didn't give any response, which was really a bit disappointing. Alas, it must be because I've been implicated by some unscrupulous master. Wang Wu seemed to have seen through Wang Lu's thoughts. She shrugged and said, "A few months ago you disappeared in the demon world. Everyone in Spirit Sword Mountain was really worried because of you. Later, when they heard that you accidentally appeared in the Southern Heaven region, the old guys in Heavenly Sword Hall, who were worried sick, prepared a welcoming banquet to wait for you to return to the mountain that night. However, they didn't expect that you actually didn't come. Moreover, you disappeared without a trace, standing all of them up. Tiske at that time, those people's inconceivable and unbelievable faces are still fresh in my memory. I also used a spell to take a picture of it so that they can redeem it at a high price later." Wang Lu didn't know whether to feel warm or guilty. At that time there were all kinds of rumors on the mountain. The elders also began to use various methods to find your trace, because they were worried that you were kidnapped. However, there were also a few people with ulterior motives who speculated that you might have defected to the enemy. However, at the critical moment I came forward to set things right and helped you win your innocence. I told them that if you were the only one missing, then the problem is indeed complicated. But now, even Lu Li, who was sent to the Southern Heaven region for experiential learning, has not come back, so there's only one possibility. As Wang Lu listened, he inwardly imagined the most realistic possibility. In the turmoil, the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall must have asked Wang Wu to find Wang Lu by virtue of the relationship between master and disciple. And Wang Wu was certainly too lazy to move, so she used the reason that Wang Lu had betrayed and defected to the enemy, so it was better to pretend that he never existed. Then, she must have been scolded by the furious disciplinary elder and the sect leader, so she had to seriously think about the whereabouts of Wang Lu. However, looking at Wang Wu's appearance, Wang Lu really didn't dare to imagine what would be the result of her hard thinking on the Spirit Sword Mountain. "I told everyone that you must have run away with little Lu Li, and then the two of you probably have already pledged to marry each other. Otherwise, how could little Lu Li be so easily abducted by you?" Wang Lu was silent. He only regretted that he didn't use a bit more force when he kicked her just now. Wang Wu's reputation as the #1 king pill in 9 regions was indeed well-deserved, but as a cultivator of non-phase method, if he really wanted to find the flaw, it was not impossible. Wang Wu, with a congratulatory smile on her face, patted Wang Lu's shoulder. "Tsk, speaking of which, you, kid, are really fast, accurate and ruthless. So easily, you picked up the most eye-catching child face *** in Spirit Sword Mountain? But you don't have to worry too much. During this time, under my vigorous persuasion, the Heavenly Sword Hall elders no longer have much opinion about this. After all, in their minds you have always had a good impression, except for senior brother Zhou Ming. That old guy is very stingy. I asked him for dowry several times, but he said that he wanted to fall out with me. His face is really thin and worthless. Asking for dowry at this juncture, elder sister Wu, you're not beaten by Uncle Zhou's brilliant sword heart, it's really because of his self-restraint. Wang Wu continued, so, you actually don't have to leave in such a sorry state. Eloping is really nothing in Spirit Sword Mountain. Moreover, even if you don't think about yourself, you have to think about little Lu Li, right? No matter what, she is a dignified successor disciple of one of the 5 uniques. How could she spend her life with you without any status? Moreover, TSK, when she is in the critical moment of her king pill tribulation, you actually made her have a difficult birth. Your face is really too despicable. Before her voice fell, the training room suddenly trembled, and then the door was opened from the inside, revealing a fresh and curious face. Fifth martial ant? Who did you just say had a difficult birth? Lu Li stood at the door, her temperament was clear and refined. Her cherry lips gently opened, and the fluctuation of King Pill-level magical power was completely revealed. Chapter 562. The path of cultivation had never been fair. Although the ultimate goal of a cultivator after setting foot on the immortal path was the unattainable ascension to become an immortal, for most of the cultivators in the world, they could not even touch the edge of the King Pill realm even if they exhausted their entire life's efforts. Being able to successfully reach the Shudan stage was already considered an expert among ordinary cultivators. Of course, compared to the tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of mortals in the 9 regions, being able to possess spiritual roots and set foot on the path to immortality was already an extremely enviable opportunity. In such a cruel environment, the existence of a few geniuses overshadowed the efforts of the other mortals. Cultivators with heavenly spiritual roots were born with the ability to sense the existence of the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. After stepping on the path of immortality, their cultivation speed was several times faster than ordinary cultivators. Furthermore, many bottlenecks that troubled other cultivators were nowhere to be seen on the path of cultivation of geniuses. Lu Li was undoubtedly a genius among geniuses. Looking at Lu Li, who had just pushed open the door, even Wang Lu was somewhat envious of her smooth King Pill tribulation. Originally, it was estimated that she would need about 10 days after her injuries healed, but in reality only 5 or 6 days had passed, and she had seized the opportunity to succeed in one fell swoop. Forming the pill ahead of time naturally meant that she had to bear a huge risk, but behind the risk was a huge reward. Forming the pill ahead of time not only did it not cause any flaws in the quality of her King Pill, but because of this brave decision, the King Pill had a sharp aura of forging ahead. Before Lu Li achieved the King Pill, she was strong in offense but weak in defense. Now, because of the King Pill stage, her defense had been greatly increased, completely above the ordinary King Pill. However, the increase in her offensive power could be said to be terrifying, which made her offense and defense even more unbalanced. Although they had not actually fought, Wang Lu could vaguely determine that this junior sister of hers, who had just entered the realm of King Pill, had a pure attack power that was not below his own. Once she advanced to the middle grade of King Pill, her attack power would only be above his. It was above a cultivator who had mastered the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Even if the sword demon were to come back to life, he wouldn't be able to do so in the King Pill realm. It could even be said that in the history of 9 regions, there were only a handful of people who could match Lu Li in terms of attack power. Congratulations, enlightened Lazarite. Wang Lu earnestly congratulated Lu Li on her amazing achievement. Even the nearby Wang Wu, in accordance with the usual practice, gave Lu Li a King Pill salute. This meant that from now on, Spirit Sword Sect's disciple Lu Li had the qualification to establish her own sect and be on an equal footing with the other senior cultivators. Of course, this qualification only existed in theory. For a disciple of one of the 5 uniques, the King Pill realm was far from the end. Therefore, Wang Wu quickly restored the amiable smile of an elder and went up to touch Lu Li's head. This little fellow is really amazing. Lu Li giggled. Then Wang Wu touched her chest and exclaimed in surprise, "It got bigger again?" Before Lu Li could exclaim, Wang Lu had already unceremoniously stabbed Wang Wu with his primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Put away your claws. Harassing a disciple is a crime of treason in Spirit Sword Sect. Be careful not to be caught by the third uncle and be punished with the punishment of eternal castration, henceforth turning into a stone woman. Wang Wu stretched out her finger to dissolve Wang Lu's sword chi and explained, "I'm just doing a physical examination on her. You know, the new King Pill might have some instability in the body. I can see that when you achieved the King Pill you must have hurt your brain." Wang Lu took advantage of the situation to ridicule him, which made both him and Wang Wu startled at the same time. As if by prior agreement, they both recalled the scene when they reached Jindan. Then they fell into silence together. A moment later, Lu Li broke the silence and curiously asked, "Fifth uncle, what is dystocia?" Well? After perfunctorily answering Lu Li's curiosity, Wang Lu was finally able to get to the point. The meeting with Wang Wu was purely accidental. However, after the accident, the dungeon raid couldn't be stopped. Before continuing, the two must exchange the progress of the dungeon raid to avoid interfering with each other. Wang Lu touched his chin. Where should I start? Is that moonless you're doing?" Wang Wu sneered. That non-mainstream person who makes herself look like a hermaphrodite? Incisive evaluation. In short, did you completely subdue her? It's easy. My telepathic finger made her forget her surname. By the way, are you interested in my new invention? I can teach you. Wang Lu also sneered. Forget it, I have a weapon that's sharper than the telepathic finger. Wang Wu asked with a somewhat strange look, a sharper weapon? What do you mean? If there's a chance I'll let you see it. In short, you've subdued Moonless and now you've come to Sky City, what are you going to do? Wang Wu said, of course, it's to use Moonless as a stepping stone to find a way to get rid of the supreme leader of the Temple of Heaven and then replace him. Don't you claim to be a professional adventurer? You still can't see such a simple thing? You should know that the supreme leader of the Temple of Heaven is roughly equivalent to a supreme-level cultivator in 9 regions, right? I know, so what? Wang Wu inexplicably looked at Wang Lu. That old thing Feng Yin's strength is also equivalent to the supreme level. I've been planning to overthrow his brutal rule for so many years, but nothing happened. It can be seen that the supreme level is actually not that great. After all, I'm the #1 king pill in 9 regions. Wang Lu inwardly sighed, thinking that this pretentious act could be given full marks. Of course, he knew that the theoretical biggest benefit of this immortal dreamland was to get rid of the Temple of Heaven and establish a new religious regime. The problem was that it could not be done in practice. That supreme leader alone had the cultivation base of supreme level. With Wang Lu's current strength, he could not handle it and no king pill could. Not to mention that the opponent was not a lone person but a huge organization. The immortal dreamland restricted the strength of the participants to not exceed the level of king pill. In fact, the strategy to restrict the participants must be within a certain framework. Otherwise, if a team of supreme-level cultivators were allowed to come in, they could easily destroy the Temple of Heaven, and then expand the heavenly earth into their own harem. This immortal dreamland would then become purely a lewd dreamland. It was even more exaggerated to think that if one had absolute force, they could even break the passage between the heavenly earth and the chaotic world. After unifying the world, they could lead the female army into the chaotic world and unify the 2 worlds. At that time, the benefits would be even more. However, there was no such amiable immortal dreamland in the group of immortal tombs, and the king pill level restriction could only make these plans a mere fantasy. However, even the Dixian people who designed the group of immortal tombs probably did not expect that there would be a perverted king pill cultivator in the future to smash the scene. In this immortal dreamland, perhaps moonless harmonious heaven was originally set to be the biggest enemy, and the high-level people of Sky City were just background settings. But now, the biggest enemy was killed by a single finger, and the background settings were put on the stage. However, could a mere Wang Wu really confront the Temple of Heaven under the command of a supreme-level cultivator? After being her disciple for so many years, he actually had an assessment of the limit of her strength. As the #1 king pill in 9 regions, Wang Wu was indeed powerful to the point of making one's hair stand on end. Let alone the other king pill cultivators, even among the Yuanying stage cultivators, almost no one was her opponent. Even the slightly weaker deity stage cultivators were not enough, such as Moonless. However, king pill after all had its limit. Even if she had a double king pill, she could only deal with middle-level deity stage cultivators, and it would be difficult for her to win against high-level deity stage cultivators. As for those who surpassed deity stage and reached the level of supreme, it would be difficult for her to even save her life. Of course, it was already shocking for a king pill to be able to do this. However, Wang Wu seemed to have a well-thought-out card up her sleeve, as if she really thought that she could swallow the Temple of Heaven, this behemoth. Wang Lu thought, could it be that Sister Wu has been hiding her true strength for so many years? At the same time, he also modified his own plan based on her plan. For a moment he was lost in thought. Seeing this, Wang Wu curiously asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I was thinking if I go to the Temple of Heaven at this time to expose you, how many benefits will I get?" "Damn you, this rebellious disciple, deceiving your master and destroying your ancestors is as natural as drinking water? I'm just not used to standing on the side of a loser. Who told you that I will fail? This time, my odds of winning are quite big, okay?" Wang Wu explained, "The supreme leader of the Temple of Heaven is about to retire. At present, the temple is preparing for the change of leadership. This is a God-given opportunity." "The supreme leader still has the concept of retirement?" "Of course there is. The Temple of Heaven is a religious organization, and the power of religious leaders usually comes from the heaven, not from themselves. The leader of the Temple of Heaven indeed has the strength of a supreme, but excluding the religious blessing, his body is at most just a high-level deity stage cultivator. In fact, the middle and high-level monks of the Temple of Heaven are like this. Once they retire from their position, their cultivation base will plummet. Wang Lu nodded. So that's how it is. No wonder you can kill the deity stage Moonless with one finger. This kind of power from the outside world has its flaws, right? Exactly. But even so, it is not worth the loss to confront a supreme, so I consider looking for an opportunity during the change of leadership. After this Qingtian retires, there are 7 competitive candidates. In addition to the 6 Shenshens, there is also the extremely powerful harmonious heaven of the western regions. The 7 people have equal opportunities. They have been secretly fighting for several years, but there is still no definite result. However, the change of leadership is imminent. I'm afraid it won't be long before the conflict will fully intensify, and at that time my opportunity will come. Through Moonless Palace of Heaven? Wang Lu reacted very quickly and immediately guessed Wang Wu's plan. The 7 candidates had been competing for several years without any result, indicating that the competition of Qingtian relied more on the forces under their control, rather than the direct designation of heaven. In fact, since heaven was not a personified god, of course, it would not directly show its spirit to designate Qingtian as the candidate. The 7 candidates occupied the peak of power in heavenly earth. Each of them had supporters behind them, but it was difficult to distinguish who was superior. Then at this time, Palace of Heaven, which had always been independent, became an important force that was enough to affect the balance and even determine the result. So the attitude of Moonless was particularly important. Although the status of the 7 candidates was higher than that of Moonless, they were bound to actively strive for her support. And in this process, Wang Wu's opportunity came. She could take the opportunity of the meeting between the 2 sides to ambush the candidates and turn them into obedient meat slaves with the telepathic finger. Then, with the full support of Moonless, she would support her own meat slave to the position and indirectly control heavenly earth from then on. Thinking of this, Wang Lu had to sigh that Wang Wu's idea was really ingenious. In fact, my chess pieces are not only Moonless. According to my plan, when the time comes for the final battle between the 7 candidates, I want to have at least 3 harmonious heaven monks and at least 15 open heaven monks. This kind of power will be enough to form an independent 8th party. Only then will I be able to truly secure victory. With so many people, are you going to use your personal charm to summon them? Wang Wu was dismissive of this. How can an illusory personal charm compare to the telepathic finger? Chapter 563. After listening to Wang Wu's grand idea, Wang Lu once again fell into contemplation. Although it seemed that her idea was somewhat fantastical, rationally speaking, there was not much problem with the feasibility. After all, if Wang Wu, this abnormal king pill, joined this immortal dreamland, it would be easy to form a crushing situation. Not to mention that she also had telepathic fingers. In this world without men, she was simply lawless. Of course, this was not accurate enough because there was still a man in heavenly earth, and it was a strong man whose function was absolutely superior to a mere telepathic finger. However, Wang Lu would not be stupid enough to jump out and work for Wang Wu at this time. 3 harmonious heavens and 15 open heavens. If a strong and fierce man were to deal with them, it would be a disaster. Therefore, it was better to let Wang Wu show off her telepathic finger. At worst, it would just be tenosynovitis. However, there was still a problem. According to Wang Wu, the time of the Temple of Heaven's succession was not far away. Would it be too late to subdue the 18 high-level people one by one? Of course it's too late. There is still a week before the succession ceremony, and I still have a lot of helpers here. You still have helpers? Wang Lu began to feel that something was wrong. You didn't come alone? Yes, Feng Yin and the others think that this is a rare experiential learning opportunity. If they only consider the magical treasures in the immortal dreamland, it would be a pity. It is better to take this opportunity to let the younger generation gain experience and broaden their horizons. Therefore, they want me to lead the team and bring almost all the talented female disciples in the sect whose cultivation base is around King Pill. Wang Lu was shocked. His sect head Uncle Master's brain flooded with water. It is rare for Lingjian school to have a few pure flowers, but they are actually handed over to you. Aren't you afraid of ruining them? What do you think I am, this traitorous disciple? A humanoid telepathic finger? I will not make a move on my own disciple. Really? Who was the one who wanted to marry me when he saw my wealth? You still have the nerve to mention that time? Wang Wu stomped her foot on the spot. It's rare for me to propose to someone, but you rejected me without hesitation. He simply doesn't put the dignity of a teacher in his eyes. Sorry, your dignity as a teacher is too insignificant. I really can't see it. In short, I brought quite a few people with me this time. With their help, we have more than enough time. Who are they? First, there's Yao Er. She's the strongest and she's strong enough to hold her own. I wanted her to deal with 8 open heavens within 3 days and give them to me to train. It's only been half a day and she's already dealt with 2. Wang Lu narrowed his eyes. Eldest senior sister? As expected of the sect leader's direct disciple. Yes, after achieving the king pill, Yao Er has finally completely digested the inheritance of the ancient sword tomb. In terms of swordsmanship alone, she can already compete with the elders of some high-rank sections. Thinking of the eldest senior sister whose attainment in swordsmanship was so strong that even the genius Lu Li had to concede defeat, Wang Lu was not surprised that she could easily deal with the open heavens who were equivalent to Yuan Ying's stage. Then there's Shixian and that stupid cat. The fighting ability of this spirit beast group is a bit worse. I assigned them 6 targets and now they've solved one of them. Their progress seems to be barely able to catch up. Wang Lu was quite surprised. Even Bai Shixian has come out of the mountain? She's actually willing to come out with you? In Wang Lu's impression, the daughter of Grand Cloud Fairy had a tranquil and natural character, and didn't like to go out for experiential learning. In addition to him, it was difficult for ordinary people to call her. Of course, it's because of my personal charm. Wang Wu was full of confidence. Anything else? The last 2 people are the non-combat group, Yu Xinyao and Little Ling Er. Before she could finish, Wang Lu interrupted in surprise. Feng Ling? Why is she here? Didn't they say that she can't leave the Blue River region? Before, it was indeed impossible, but during the period when you were missing, the Heavenly Sword Hall developed a mountain range seal. As long as you carry this seal no matter where you are, it's the same as being in the Spirit Sword Mountain. This time, I called Little Ling Er to come with me because I want to test the effect of the mountain range seal. At present, it seems that the effect is good, and her strength can also be exerted in the Southern Heaven region. Therefore, although it's a non-combat group, when necessary she must have the ability to protect herself. Wang Lu nodded. I understand. 2 combat groups, 1 soy sauce group, plus yourself, there's enough manpower. In a week's time, there's indeed enough time to capture those 18 people. Moreover, even if there's a problem in the middle and you don't capture all the targets, you can still count on Moonless, the leader of the Palace of Heaven, which you already have in your hand. It's enough to ensure that your next plan can be carried out smoothly. Yes, and if I can capture all the targets, I can even go further. I don't need to support any puppets, but instead, I can personally inherit the Temple of Heaven and completely control the Temple of Heaven and even the heavenly earth. Wang Wu said and then turned to look at Wang Lu. According to the original calculation, if I want to perfectly implement this plan, I'm still a bit short on manpower, so my goal is not set too high. But now that I've met you and little Lu Li, I think I might as well do things perfectly. How about it, do you want to help me? You and Lu Li should also need this kind of actual combat experience, right? Sure. Wang Lu thought for a moment. If they had the support of Wang Wu, he and Lu Li even dared to challenge the harmonious heaven-level opponents. Thus he nodded in agreement. Good, then come with me to the stronghold first. You and Lu Li take a rest. After you fully recover, I'll take you to participate in the action. Under the leadership of Wang Wu, the group of 3 came to an exquisite and gorgeous courtyard in Sky City. This was a real estate purchased by a Cochin-level nun in Sky City. Although the location was not in the center of the city, it was still very valuable. However, when that Cochin-level nun was knocked out by Zhu Shiyao in an ambush and sent to Wang Wu to have a taste of telepathic finger, she obediently handed over the real estate. Now it had become Wang Wu's stronghold. When Wang Lu came to the entrance of the courtyard, he saw a girl in the courtyard holding a volume of swordsmanship book. She was reading it while walking and her eyes were in a trance. When she heard the footsteps at the entrance of the courtyard, the girl's thoughts were interrupted. She turned her head and suddenly showed an incredible look. Wang? Senior brother Wang Lu, it's you? Wang Lu waved his hand. Junior sister Yu, long time no see. Where have you been all this time? Yu Xinyao put down the swordsmanship book in her hand and impatiently asked, Everyone is so worried about you. It's a long story. After Wang Lu finished speaking, he saw that Yu Xinyao's eyebrows were slightly wrinkled and her eyes were moist. Obviously, she was not satisfied with this answer. Wang Lu had no choice but to helplessly shrug his shoulders and said with a smile, In short, I had a good dream. Sweet dreams? Yu Xingyao curiously tilted her head, but then she suddenly saw that after Wang Lu left, Lu Li, who was holding a bag of candy, ran into the courtyard with a face full of interest. She then threw herself to the ground, hugged Wang Lu's arm, shook it and said in a spoiled manner, "Senior brother, I still want that candy, can you reward me a little more?" Yu Xingyao was immediately stunned. Her eyes inconceivably swept between Wang Lu and Lu Li, and then her expression quickly turned gloomy. "So the good dream that senior brother said is..." "I'm sorry, just now, in a moment of desperation, Xingyao was too abrupt and asked a question that I shouldn't have asked. Please forgive me, senior brother." Wang Lu was baffled. "What do you mean rude?" Yu Xingyao refused to say anything more and shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't feel very well, I'll take my leave first." With that, the girl flew out of the courtyard on her flying sword and flew in the other direction of Sky City. Wang Lu watched Yu Xinyao's departing back. He was stunned and felt that he seemed to have encountered some kind of misunderstanding. Looking back, he saw Wang Wu's gloating smile. "Little Lu, you're really a scum." "What the?" Being evaluated by the person who was the least qualified to criticize others as scum was simply a strange injustice. Wang Lu stared at his master's smiling face and was speechless for the time it takes to drink a cup of tea. After a long time, Wang Lu finally calmed down. When he was about to find Yu Xingyao to explain, he heard a person quickly coming in from outside the door. That crisp footstep, as well as the slightly rough action of pushing the door, were all characteristics of a certain person. Wang Lu turned around and greeted, "Long time no see, Sister Ling." As a result, before he could finish his words, Feng Ling angrily pointed at his nose and asked, "Just now I saw Xingyao go out crying, and when I asked, she only said you came back. What did you do to her?" "I just had a good dream." By the time he explained everything to Feng Ling and Yu Xingyao, a long time had already been wasted. After the misunderstanding was solved, Yu Xingyao and Feng Ling were extremely embarrassed and apologized to Wang Lu. However, just as Yu Xingyao raised her head full of self-blame, she heard a burst of footsteps outside the door. It turned out that Bai Shixian and the cat girl Ling Yan had returned. Seeing Wang Lu in the courtyard, the two spirit beast girls were taken aback, but Ling Yan obviously showed a disgusted expression and then hid in the shadow behind Bai Shixian. As for Bai Shixian, she calmly nodded to Wang Lu and then said, "Half a day ago, I met several Yin and Yang School's junior sisters outside Gorgeous Town. They asked me to say hello to you, senior brother." "Okay." An ominous premonition rose in Wang Lu's heart. "They also said that next time we have a chance to play together, the way we play will certainly satisfy you." "They are deliberately playing with me, aren't they?" Bai Shixian looked at Wang Lu and then looked at Lu Li and then continued, "They said that next time they will never lose to Lu Li." "Ah." The nearby Yu Xingyao gently covered her mouth. Her eyes wandered between Wang Lu and Lu Li for a moment, and then she sighed, covered her face and walked away. Feng Ling fiercely glared at Wang Lu, and then accompanied Yu Xingyao to leave. Wang Lu blankly watched the two people gradually go further and further away, thinking that this was the so-called Azura field. Behind him, his master considerately patted his shoulder and asked, "Do you need me to teach you telepathic finger to solve the crisis?" You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.